Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the City Council regular meeting for Monday, January 23rd, 2023. We'll call this meeting to order. Could we have a roll call vote, please? Roll call, please.
Miss Wu.
Here.
Mr. Evans.
Here.
Miss Hersey.
Here.
Miss Colasetti.
Here.
Miss Bishop.
Here.
Miss Wilkin.
Here.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Here. Next item is approval of minutes from previous meetings, and this would be for December 13th, 14th, the 12th, 13th, 14th, December 13th, 14th, and 15th.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Are there any additions to the agenda? Okay. We'll move on to presentations and public input, and we will take public input first. So if anyone wishes to address the Urbana City Council, please step up to the microphone, state your name, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Good evening. Are we on?
You need to get closer.
Step closer, please.
Good evening.
That's good. That's better.
Honorable City Council members, Mayor Marlin, and staff. My name is Chris Storr. I represent Champaign County Board, 10th District.
And my name's Jamala Rogers, and I also represent the Champaign County Board, 10th District. Okay. Honorable City Council members. Mayor
Please
and-
speak into the microphone.
Can you hear me better now?
That's better,
Okay,
yes.
great. We come today in support of the Urbana Park District Health and Wellness Center for the East Washington, Rainbow View, Prairie Green, Learman neighborhoods. We hope that you will allocate ARPA grants to fully fund the request for a comprehensive health and wellness center that will provide the needed recreation center and community meeting rooms. The recreation centers are for the future of the Brookins Building Center's gymnasium is uncertain, and now that many county offices are moving to the county plaza, we don't know what will happen with the rooms. The community meeting rooms are for programs comparable to those available in neighboring cities, for programs that will help the youth to succeed in preparing for life, and programs to serve adults and families.
Thank you. The Forest Preserve District of Champaign County will join 22 other nonprofit and government organizations in the Park District to provide these programs after a disquieting global pandemic that has adversely affected everyone's life. The many problems facing the neighborhood warrant full, not half or partial measures. Champaign County Board awaits the decision of the Urbana City Council to determine the amount of county ARPA funds to support the center.
The American Rescue Plan Act funds are a rare infusion of discretionary funds not normally available to state, county, and local governments. We urge members to consider funding for the Urbana Park District request for the Health and Wellness Center along East Washington Street. The Urbana Park District has raised over $10 million, but is working to meet a $3.5 million gap for construction. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to address the Urbana City Council? All right. We'll move on to the presentations part of the agenda, and the first item there will be Urbana Fire Department promotions. So at this time, if Cody Fetzner, Blake Coons, Michael Phillips, and Trent Short, please step forward.
Good evening. I'd like to say thank you to Mayor Marlin and the council members for once again allowing me to come and express how very proud I am of the men and women of the Urbana Fire Department and the work and service they do for our community here. As firefighters, we vow to save lives and property for the members of the community that we serve. And to do that, we stand before the public and we give a pledge. That pledge is a public and selfless pledge of service to the community despite the personal risk and circumstances that these individuals face. So tonight, I appreciate you guys helping me honor one of our newly hired firefighters and 3 members of our department who have achieved promotion. So with that, Mayor Marlin, if you'll come and do the oaths. Hold on a second. I gotta get my helpers on now. So. The first oath will be by firefighter Cody Fetzner. On December 19th, 2022, Cody Fetzner was hired by the Urbana Fire Department. Cody is a new candidate for the Urbana Fire Department, and he's a medical emergency technician and an active member of the National Guard. After reading his oath, tonight Cody will be pinned by his wife, Madison.
Come on up, would you like to join Cody? Stand alongside. There you go. All right, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Cody Fetzner,
I, Cody Fetzner,
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the duties of the position of firefighter
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the duties of the position of firefighter
for the city of Urbana in the county of Champaign, Illinois,
for the city of Urbana in the county of Champaign, Illinois,
and will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and the laws of the United States,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States,
the state of Illinois, and the charter and ordinances of the city of Urbana,
the state of Illinois, and the charter and ordinances of the city of Urbana,
acting rightfully for the citizens of Urbana.
acting rightfully for the citizens of Urbana.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations. Okay, Cody, you're going to want to give this to the clerk, and they will sign it and get it back to you.
Who do you have next?
I have Blake.
Next, we'll have Lieutenant Blake Coons. November 5th of last year, Blake was promoted to the rank of lieutenant. Blake has 11 years of experience with the Urbana Fire Department. Lieutenant Coons serves as the city's health insurance committee, is an EMS service officer, a fire investigator, a technical rescue technician, and a paramedic. After citing his oath, Lieutenant Coons will be pinned by his wife, Jamie.
Please raise your right hand. I, Blake Coons,
I, Blake Coons,
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the duties of the position of lieutenant
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the duties of the position of lieutenant
for the city of Urbana in the county of Champaign, Illinois,
for the city of Urbana in the county of Champaign, Illinois,
and will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States,
the state of Illinois,
the state of Illinois,
and the charter and ordinances of the city of Urbana,
and the charter and ordinances of the city of Urbana,
acting rightfully for the citizens of Urbana.
acting rightfully for the citizens of Urbana,
So help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations.
Next, we have Lieutenant Michael Phillips. December 14th of 2022, Mike Phillips was promoted to the rank of lieutenant. Mike Phillips has 20 years of experience with the Urbana Fire Department. Lieutenant Phillips is a paramedic, technical rescue technician, and serves as the department's interim fire code official. Tonight, Mike will be pinned by his wife, Rebecca.
I, Michael Phillips,
I, Michael Phillips,
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the duties of the position of lieutenant
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the duties of the position of lieutenant
for the city of Urbana in the county of Champaign, Illinois,
for the city of Urbana in the county of Champaign, Illinois,
and will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States,
will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States,
the state of Illinois,
the state of Illinois,
and the charter and ordinances of the city of Urbana,
and the charter and ordinances of the city of Urbana,
acting rightfully for the citizens of Urbana.
acting rightfully for the citizens of Urbana.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Next, we have Captain Trent Short. December 14th of last year, Trent was promoted to the rank of captain. Trent Short has 23 years of experience with the Urbana Fire Department. Captain Short was a former union president, was in charge of ordering the department's protective clothing, and is a member of UFD's technical rescue team. Tonight, Trent will be pinned by his wife, Jody.
Raise your right hand. I, Trent Short,
I, Trent Short,
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the duties of the position of captain
do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the duties of the position of captain
for the city of Urbana in the county of Champaign, Illinois,
for the city of Urbana in the county of Champaign, Illinois,
and will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States,
the state of Illinois,
the state of Illinois,
and the charter and ordinances of the city of Urbana,
and the charter and ordinances of the city of Urbana,
acting rightfully for the citizens of Urbana.
acting rightfully for the citizens of Urbana,
So help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations. Thank you all.
Thank you,
All
guys.
yours, Chief.
We're going to step out and get pictures, and then I'll slide back in here.
While folks are leaving the room, Tim Bannon, you want to come on up and get ready for your presentation? Well, I'd like to welcome Tim Bannon, who is the Executive Director of Willard Airport, and he's going to give us a brief update tonight on what's happening out at Willard.
Can you check your microphone is turned on?
It is on now?
It is on,
Okay, great,
okay.
thank you. I don't think I've ever been invited or attended a council meeting in Urbana before, so thank you very much for having me and for the invite to provide an update about Willard Airport today. So I'm Tim Bannon. I've been at Willard Airport about 5 years. Started as the Assistant Director of Operations in charge of security and maintenance and operations overall, and then about a year later got promoted to the director spot. So thank you again for having me. So a brief update about COVID-19 recovery. We are still in a COVID-19 hangover regarding transportation overall in the United States, but especially at smaller regional airports. So we are a smaller regional airport. We are down 37% in overall seats available. In the chart, you can see from 2019, we had 320 seats departing each day, and now on average, we have 200. That is slowly changing as we upgauge the size of aircraft, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. However, we are substantially down. We have 4 flights per day, and at our peak, we had approximately 8 flights per day. That's not all our fault. There's a lot of changes in the industry overall and how the large hubs work. Specifically, O'Hare has less departure blocks per day, so it's not all of our faults. There's been restructuring. However, we are down, and it's worth noting. Aircraft upsizing in 2023 for Willard Airport. It's a great thing to see larger aircraft at Willard. This is a picture from back in December when our first Embraer 175 landed. This aircraft is significantly larger than the Embraer 145, which has 50 seats. This aircraft has 76 seats, and it has first-class service. So that's very nice for anybody who's carries points at American, of course. You can get upgrades, but also for purchase, get to first class, which is great. This is the first time dual-class service has been in our market. We did return back to Embraer 145s on the Dallas route. Chicago never transitioned fully to start. It was just the Dallas route. So we are back to 145s, but we imagine getting back to those larger aircraft here mid-2023 is what's expected. So just wanted to share a photo of that, as it was a big day for us to have that first landing of the Embraer 175. We have the highest load factors in the last 10 years between April and October of 2022. So when we talk about recovering from the pandemic, while our seats available in the market, departures per day is down, the percentage of seats that are selling on the flights is the highest it's been in 10 years. So what that indicates to us is that we can accommodate more seats in our market and more flights per day. So we are constantly working with consultants and meeting with airlines to position ourselves for future growth. This is just here to showcase that our load factors are very high, and we're very happy to see that. High demand exists in Champaign County. So this chart, although it's small typing, can showcase where passengers fly from in our area. So in 2019, we had nearly 1 million people departing from our catchment area, which is about an hour's drive around Willard Airport. 20% of those customers stayed flying out of Willard Airport, which is lower today because we have lower seats. The remainder flew from large hub airports, primarily Chicago O'Hare, Chicago Midway, and Indianapolis. We had very small leakage to our neighbors, Springfield, Peoria, and Bloomington, and St. Louis. So what this really showcases is people want direct flights to where they're trying to go. And you can get to that direct flight by flying directly from the large hub. So the majority of people, while they have a connection, it is driving instead of flying. So what we're trying to do is continually grow our flights so that more people connect through Willard Airport and depart from Willard instead of driving to their first connection and up to O'Hare. As everybody who's been in the room here has probably driven to O'Hare before, it's quite long, and you have a toll road to contend with. So there's added cost to that as well. So that's what I wanted to showcase with this quick layout. 20% of our total travelers fly from Willard Airport, and again, that's lowered today. So the Willard Airport in mid-2022 secured a small community air service development grant issued from the Department of Transportation. We've been applying for this grant for numerous years. We did win this grant about 10 years ago, which we didn't use. However, we achieved it again, $850,000 to secure service to a Washington, D.C. airport. Primarily, we'd like to be at Washington Reagan because it's so close to all of the business happening in D.C., but we're not fully committed just to DCA. I think we'd be happy with an offer to Washington Dulles, and we'd be happy to consider that. But the way the grant was written, it's any airport in D.C., but we'd surely like DCA just because of that connectivity. The main problem with DCA is it's slot restricted, and there's already, the slots is a landing slot. And those are some of the most valuable assets that airlines have at DCA. We'd have to convince the airlines to let us into those slots instead of restoring service that was lost over the pandemic or for other reasons. So it is difficult to secure flights to DCA, but we are constantly working on that on behalf of our community. Fundraising as well to the right shows that we have a total of $1.9 million to offer an airline in the form of minimum revenue guarantee to offset any risk starting service into the market. And we also have marketing money that we can put into the equation as well to promote the new service to make sure it's successful. So we have a pretty nice incentive package today offered to new entrants to serve the route. New construction coming up in 2023. We're building a brand new car wash. Right now we have an open air tent that we cannot use when it freezes outside because the water is not able to pump through the hoses. So we're gonna build a brand new car wash so we can wash cars 365 days a year. And you take that for granted when you have a car wash until it's outdoors, and then you can't. So we constantly have dirty cars when it's cold out. We're gonna change that because we are the hub of rental cars in the area, we believe. We rented 12,170 cars for different durations at an average transaction total of $278 from Willard Airport alone with 2 rental car companies this last year. So we're very proud of that, and we want to make our facilities the best they can be and to offer the best cars that we can offer everybody that rents from us. Reconstructing the rental car counters and improving lighting. So this is happening at the end of our terminal this year. It's an architectural rendering on the right-hand side there that shows what it will be. And on the left, it is original to the building. So you have center entrances and little doors that lead back to a very tight rental car operation. Each rental car operation is separate from one another. We're gonna go to a community counter. We're gonna rebuild the whole thing. ADA compliance is improved and improved lighting. So overall, this will be a really great project for us, and it should be a showcase of Willard Airport as it's one of our primary revenue generators and business lines. This upcoming year, we are designing a new TSA checkpoint. So anybody who's flown through Willard Airport, there's only one lane, and pre-check is there. However, pre-check has to stop for the regular line to go, and the regular line has to stop for the pre-check to go. So we are going to be expanding that TSA checkpoint into existing space, expanding from 1 lane to 2 lanes, and we'll have a adequately sized queue line. So very exciting, it'll be modern, and there's no more traffic jam at the top of the escalator. So this is coming design in 23, construction late 24. We hope to cut the ribbon at the end of 24. We also took delivery of a new aircraft rescue and firefighting truck in October of 2022. Every 15 years, we're eligible for a fire truck. We only have one we call index truck at the airport, meaning the federal compliance of the airport having certain firefighting capabilities that is fulfilled with one truck. So we took delivery after specifications were developed, put on RFP, awarded it to Oshkosh based on bid, and really exciting. Went up to Neenah, Wisconsin, and took delivery of we did a pre-delivery inspection and then took delivery of it about a month later. So that is on site. We have modern equipment now, and very proud of that. Long-term projects is one of our last slides here. We have a lot of different projects. I'm not going to go through each of them specifically, but the airport is a constant work in progress. As our facilities age, we have to reinvest into the physical infrastructure that makes it all possible. Without runways, taxiways, fire station, navigational aids, none of it really happens. So we are constantly working with the FAA, Illinois Department of Transportation, and our planners to make sure that our airfield is not only safe today, but safe for years to come as well. So this just shows a map of all the different projects we're pursuing, and we have nearly a $50 million capital improvement program over the next 5 years that we're asking for. That's not all guaranteed to be received, of course, but we are applying for it, and hopefully the FAA and IDOT see that we have needs as well and fund our projects. So that concludes my quick presentation today. I wanted to keep it brief for everybody, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
We have time for a couple of questions. Any questions for Tim? Mary Alice?
Thank you so much for coming and telling us about all the upcoming plans. I was wondering if you have any stats on the percentage of flights that are on time.
I don't today. I'd be happy to follow up with you. The last time we looked at on-time performance, we were equivalent to industry standards. That doesn't mean we're always on time, but no airport is. So many factors go into on-time performance, weather being one of them that we can't control and we have to respond to. However, there are mechanical issues at times, and that's something that's a little bit out of our control. Gratefully, we have Flightstar at the airport, who's a fixed-base operator, has on-site airlines maintenance staff that can come over and troubleshoot problems in real time when we do have a delay. So while other airports may have that delay or a flight cancellation, usually we can get the aircraft back going again with our on-site services, and the airplane can depart still. So that's a really big benefit of Willard Airport, and honestly an asset that we pitch to new airlines that we want to come in as well.
Is there any hope of having another airline? I know United was here for a while and then they bowed out. Is there any discussions in the next couple of years for another airline?
Of course, that is definitely a high priority for us. We attend different air service forums and conferences around the country. We create custom incentive packages for airlines to consider coming into Willard Airport. We have data that showcases what destinations may be beneficial to start. So the work is never ending. Unfortunately, it's just very, very competitive industry-wide. Not only are Springfield, Bloomington, Peoria, or even Decatur considered our direct competitors, if you will. Smaller airports across the country that could use these aircraft we're competing with. So we're not just competing with our geographical neighbors, we're competing with the whole United States for these small regional aircraft. Pilots are also in very high demand, so the airlines are having a difficult time, I believe, managing their resources effectively and making sure that all of the successful markets and routes are served. That's very difficult. So many airports have lost service. So for one of the smaller airports, we're always talking about air service development and adding more, and that's definitely a huge part of it. But our relationship with American is very important to maintain and to appreciate that they haven't left our market. They've stuck with us and still provide that service to our community. I'm very grateful for that because many airports have lost service altogether. I don't think that's in the cards for us. We are profitable, and we have good service and good load factors. However, other airports haven't fared as well. So I'm very grateful for that. You're welcome.
Grace.
Thank you so much for the update and presentation. And so it sounds like we're looking at trying to get connection to DC area. I was wondering if there was anywhere else in the foreseeable future you're also working on connecting?
Yes, the DC route would be served by a mainline service like American or another airline that operates similarly. We, of course, would like to get down to a Florida destination. We've had productive meetings with Allegiant and others that haven't resulted in a new route or service being added at this time, but at times these relationships take many years to develop and foster. So I believe we are in a good position to add service to Florida at some point when we fit into the airline's, strategic planning. That's really, they have to decide whether they start new service at Willard Airport or whether they restore service at another airport that they've suspended service. So those are really difficult decisions with such low amount of resources today, especially the pilot shortages, high level of retirements, and there's not enough backfilling of new pilots to fly all the aircraft in service. So this issue may get worse over time before it gets better. But we are constantly meeting with low-cost carriers. We do present the data that so many people fly down to Tampa and Orlando. Everybody would love a Vegas flight, so, Allegiant going to Vegas makes a lot of sense since that's their headquarters. But we can present our data, we can present the incentives, but there's really not much we can do to force them to start service. That is something that they would have to do, partnering with us, and that's their decision.
Great, thanks so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. Oh, sorry.
Hey,
didn't see-
Diane, I have a couple questions.
Okay, we'll go to Sharice and then James. James? All right, James, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Tim. I really appreciate you coming and talk to us. I have a question. I saw the slide about the TSA upgrade. Is it going to be using the space to the right as you come up the stairs for that expanded TSA service?
Yes, it would be using existing space in the terminal, which used to be the restaurant cafe area to the right when you come up the escalators. That whole area will be demolished and all of the internal walls will be taken down. And that area is quite large and it'll work well for a new TSA checkpoint, which is good. We don't have to build on a big expansion on the terminal to make this happen. We can use existing space. So hopefully a little more cost effective than having to build something new.
And so then that narrow connection between the two major buildings will just be used for getting in and getting out.
Yes, that's correct. It'll be used as a walkway, and that's
Okay.
what it was intended to be in the building of the, when it was built in the late 1980s. That was purely a walkway. We're going to restore what it was built for in the first place, and we're going to give it back to being a walkway. So very excited about that, and it'll really open it up and make the facility feel more open. And can't wait for that. I mean, when 9/11 happened and we had to put the checkpoint somewhere, it just gets put in the most logical point in the airport terminal, and that was it at the time. So as things have changed and we underwent an airport master plan over the last 5 years, that new space was identified. So really looking forward to that project.
All right, thanks. And then my other question is, I noticed that the leakage number for Bloomington is like 8%.
Mhm.
Is that down, and can we attribute that to the rise of Lyft and Uber as an alternative to getting to the airport?
I'm not sure what we can attribute that to, if it's Lyft or Uber. I think it's more associated with a low-cost carrier at Bloomington, specifically Allegiant. So that really wasn't our traveler to begin with, as the customers go to Bloomington to fly that Allegiant route to vacation destinations. And that's why we're so interested in Allegiant and any other low-cost carrier who wants to serve us to the south. We believe there's a heavy demand for that, and it shows that by our leakage going to Bloomington, because that flight's available to go south, and we just don't have that today. So, but relatively low leakage. We have about 90% leakage to the larger hubs around us and only about 10% to the smaller regionals around us, primarily due to Allegiant.
All right, thank you.
Okay,
Welcome.
and last question, Sharice.
I was just interested in what is your percentage of private airplanes that come in and out of Willard?
That's the vast majority of aircraft operations, is corporate and general aviation. We do have Parkland Flight School that the university used to operate. We gave the rights to that program to Parkland in 2014. It has steadily been growing since they took it. They just eclipsed 100 students this last year enrollment, which is very good for that pilot shortage I was talking about. But it's going to take a lot of time to get those pilots up and ready to fly the commercial airlines. It's going to take multiple years. So it's not a quick fix, unfortunately. But the majority of our operations are general aviation operations, approaches, touch and goes, flight training ops of that nature. But only 8 operations a day as airlines in the other. We do about 40,000 operations a year, so can't do the math in my head that quickly, but the most of it's general aviation.
So you have a flight school out there, And that's connected with Parkland?
Yes, Parkland Institute of Aviation is a tenant of Willard Airport, and we have an agreement with them to operate the flight school from the university perspective. So they operate the flight school on their own. We're not involved in the education component or the flight school component, but we're very happy they're there and that they're training the future generations of pilots that we so desperately need.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Again, thank you for coming. Thanks to the members of the advisory committee and supporters in the audience. And I have to say, I flew in and out of Willard last week, had an excellent experience. It would have been perfect if Einstein Bagels was open, but the coffee was there, so at least that was that. Looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you for all the improvements on the way. The airport's an incredibly important part of our local and actually regional economy. All right, we'll move on to financial forecasts with Elizabeth Hannon and Allie Robinson from the Finance Department.
All right, so I know it's hard to believe, but here we are again. Seems like it was just a few months ago, but it's been a year. So this is for us an annual exercise. Our financial policies actually require that we prepare a financial forecast annually. And this is really the first step in our budget process. Our focus here is I want to say exclusively on the general fund, but some other funds do impact this forecast. And as you know, the general fund pays for most basic city services, so virtually all of our police and fire, the vast majority of public works services are funded from the general fund. And we use this just to get a high-level picture of our financial condition and make decisions about the budget process for the coming year. So quickly, I'm just going to say there's always risk in forecasting. We don't really know what the future is. We're giving you our best educated guess. We focus on the likely scenario, but we do create actually 3 scenarios to get kind of a broad range of options to consider. And then, focusing on the likely scenario, we continuously kind of monitor for things that would push us in one direction or another from that. So in the near term, in terms of our economic outlook, we expect that there's likely to be another recession in the coming year, but that it will be fairly short in duration. Also worth noting, inflation is still high. But it is starting to ease, and we're hopeful that that's going to continue. Long-term inflation projections that we focus on for the forecast have been pretty steady at 2 to 2.5% for about 20 years. And those are increasing now. We rely pretty heavily on the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Survey of Economic Forecasters. So it's looking like long-term inflation is going to be closer to 3% now, and that also impacts the forecast. Just quickly, a look back at where we've been. Between FY18 and FY21, we went through some really serious adjustments to try and achieve a sustainable budget. And this chart shows in blue expenditure reductions, and that's a cumulative number that we made over that period, and in green revenue increases. So over that period, about 1.34 million in expenditure reductions and 1.15 million in revenue increases, which added up to 2.49 million. Our target for that was 2.5. At that point, we fully believed that we were going to have a balanced and sustainable budget going forward, and then the pandemic happened. So that changed everything. So right now, we feel that heading into FY24, we're in relatively good shape. However, our expenditures are growing faster than our revenues, which is not sustainable over the long term. Also, you might recall from last year's budget discussions, we funded some programs on a limited term basis. And obviously, at the end of that term, there has to be a decision about whether to continue those programs. So we're going to need some intervention to rebalance our budget. We have, because of our careful planning and our healthy fund balance, we have time to be thoughtful about that. So I'm going to give this to Ally.
Right. So in this forecast, we use two primary indicators of fiscal health. So first is the recurring expenditures as a percentage of recurring revenues. So this, indicates the ability to sustain expenditures for programs and services over the long term.
Ally, could you move the microphone a little closer? Thank you.
All right. So the recurring expenditures as a percentage of recurring revenues. So this indicates the ability to sustain expenditures for programs and services over the long term, and also ensures, the city does not make long-term commitments for which funding may not be available in the future. And so the city's current policy is budgeting at recurring expenditures not more than 98.5% of recurring revenues. And the reason behind this is, to provide a cushion against modest fluctuations. And the second indicator is the fund balance as a percentage of recurring expenditures. So this, is an indicator of good fiscal health, and also provides the city the flexibility to make financial decisions that impact the general fund. And so the city's current financial policy is maintaining a fund balance of at least 25% of recurring expenditures. So this was updated last year from 20 to 25%, as you all remember. And so the intent of that was to put the city in a better financial position when we deal with unexpected events such as like natural disasters or another economic downturns. And so there are two key assumptions that we want to point out in this forecast. First is we built in an additional funding to capital improvement plans, which is $7.5 million as a one-time transfer that is over 5 years. So this would be unrestricted funds, which can be used for a variety of capital improvement projects. And so this will be, details would be worked out in the capital improvement plan. So the intent of this is to, potentially reduce the need to issue debt. And then we also built in a one-time transfer, a total of $2 million over 2 years from general fund to retained risk fund, and also increase in recurring transfers. Elizabeth will explain more in detail of why we are doing this.
Sure. So I believe we've talked about this before, but we actually have a fund in our budget called the Retained Risk Fund. And in that fund, we pay for all of our insurance requirements. We pay also all of our liability and workers' compensation claims. And so that is funded by transfers from other budget activities across the city, mostly the general fund. But you might recall that over the past, several years, we've transferred, I have that number handy. We've transferred quite a bit of money into there. We've done one-time transfers to kind of keep the fund sustainable. But this fund has a really significant impact on general fund, and so we took a closer look at it this year because it's been a few years since we did that. So the biggest part of the biggest expenditures in retained risk are for workers' compensation payments. So over time, workers' compensation insurance has become much more expensive, and the self-insured retention limits, which kind of like your deductible on your personal auto policy, have become much higher. So currently, we have a self-insured retention limit for public safety employees of $700,000 per claim, and for all other employees, $600,000 per claim. So basically, we pay 100% of virtually every workers' compensation claim, unless there's something that's truly catastrophic, which we hope never happens. it's kind of difficult to convey this information, so Ally helped me come up with the chart that you're looking at. Basically, what happens is our third-party administrators for liability and workers' comp estimate reserves for various claims. So sometimes claims can take years to kind of fully play out. And so the bar that you see on the very left, the lighter colored blue bar, is our current reserved amounts for workers' compensation and liability claims. That means we have open claims for which we think we will pay those amounts. And then we've estimated on an annual basis going forward what the expenditures will be just for kind of our routine levels of claims for insurance policies and such. And so you can see if we actually had to pay out all of those amounts that have been reserved based on the expert opinion of our third-party administrators, we would virtually deplete our entire fund balance in the retained risk fund. And so that is the reason for saying that we need to make those additional $2 million in one-time transfers, and then on an annual basis, we need to ramp up the funding so that we don't have to keep coming back and asking for one-time funding. I know that it's a lot to explain, it's a lot to try to convey on one chart. So I'm going to toss it back to Ally here.
All right, so this chart shows the projected recurring revenues and expenditures through fiscal year 28. That's under likely scenario. And so as you can see, recurring revenues stay above recurring expenditures from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 26. However, this reverses starting fiscal year 27, where recurring expenditures exceed recurring revenues. So based on the current assumptions, this tells us that the predicted level of expenditures may not be sustainable with current sources of revenues in the longer term. And the next chart shows us the rate of growth in recurring revenues and expenditures under likely scenario. And as you can see, we continue to show a structural gap where recurring revenues do not grow as fast as recurring expenditures over throughout the forecast period. And so if this trend continues, where recurring expenditures stay above recurring or outpaces the rate of growth of recurring revenues, the city will be in a position where we might have to increase our revenues or find other revenue sources or expenditure reductions. Or otherwise, if we don't do that, general fund balances would be exhausted over the longer term. And the next chart shows us under all cases or under all scenarios, the fund balance decreases over time throughout the forecast period. And under worst case scenario, this decreases more quickly. And then focusing on the likely fund balance, we expect to exceed the 25% goal throughout the forecast period. So this gives us, again, a buffer against dealing against modest unexpected event such as natural disasters or fiscal emergencies. Also, this gives us time to plan for, to address the issue of structural gap between recurring revenues and expenditures. And so the decrease over time in fund balance is, in part due in part by the allocation of the CIP fund, which I mentioned earlier, and also the retained risk fund transfers. And also any excess fund balance would be most likely allocated to one-time expenditures. And then I will hand it back over to Elizabeth. She will talk about recommended strategies.
So some of these you're going to see as repeats, but the strategies based on the review of the forecast, the strategies that we're recommending are continuing to prioritize economic development. I honestly don't see a time when we would not recommend that as a strategy. Limiting expenditure increases in next year's budget. So really, we would just focus on maintaining current services. I don't see next year's budget as the time to be trying to do a lot of new things that we're not already doing. And then also long-term, we know we've talked about this before, we need to plan for revenue increases. So, flip So in terms of planning for revenue increases, again, there's this gap between the growth and recurring revenues and expenditures. So we always kind of have, I always have a list that I maintain that, you know, kind of has options in case we should need them. We'll be updating that, and some of the considerations we'll be looking at would be, you know, remaining competitive with neighboring communities in terms of attracting development and attracting residents, the impact of different revenue options on equity, the cost of administering new revenues. So, you know, you want to get a fair amount of bang for your buck. If something is complex and requires us to add a new staff position, we don't really get the full benefit. And then the difficulty of implementation. So we'll be looking at that over the next couple of months, and we'll have further discussions about that with council. Also, one other alternative that we may talk about would be whether we want to set a goal of attracting new market rate housing units. We think potentially over the long term, 1,000 units might be a realistic target. As you know, we lost population in the last census, and that hurt us to the tune of, well, more than $500,000 a year. Just the per capita revenue distributions were that amount. So even if only half of those were occupied by new residents, that would be about a 3% population increase, could generate about $550,000 for the general fund in those per capita revenue distributions, but would certainly have other impacts that are more difficult to measure. So, you know, people shopping here in town would affect our sales tax revenue. People dining in town would affect food and beverage revenue. Also, increasing population would have a positive impact on other funds, which isn't really the purpose of this forecast. But for example, our motor fuel tax revenue from the state is a per capita distribution. Community Development Block Grant is partly based on population. So that's just one approach that we may put out there as an alternative to just doing revenue increases. So we're happy to answer questions.
Questions? Chris?
Thank you for the presentation. Elizabeth, do you know specifically, have you identified what the reoccurring expenditures are?
Yes, we do that kind of all the time.
Right. I know.
So we do that when you approve the budget. We very carefully do that analysis, and then every time we amend the budget, we very carefully, identify things that are, one-time versus recurring, and we kind of track that throughout the year.
Okay. So if I look at the budget, I can see where the expenditures are then, specifically.
So looking at the budget, so we tell you that, we share that information, but looking at the budget book, it's kind of hard to discern what are one-time versus recurring expenditures.
Yeah.
It's hard because the budget is about expenditure control, right? But it's not necessarily distinguishing those two things. But we could tell you what our, I don't have it in front of me, but what our current budgeted recurring expenditures are with, not too much trouble.
Okay, I figured that. I think you realize that the taxpayers are going to say, okay, you're raising revenue, which means raising some kind of tax, right? And they're going to want to know why. So,
well, to be clear, there's always the alternative, which is reducing expenditures.
Yeah.
But we've done that. We've been through a lot of expenditure reductions, at least in my 8+ years here. I think at this point, further expenditure reductions would be very painful. We would be cutting services that would be very apparent to the public.
Thank you.
The biggest reoccurring expense we have are people, personnel expenditures. And if you start reducing personnel, then you do start reducing services. So if people ask what are the recurring expenditures, by far the largest category is personnel. Salaries. Questions? Mary Alice.
So we've talked a lot about the 2020 census and potentially doing a special census. I think the earliest we could do it would be 2023, if I remember correctly, which we happen to be in 2023 right now. You know, realistically, if the city does go through that process, do you have any estimate in terms of how that would change some of the drop-offs that we've seen with the revenue? You had referenced CDBG funds and motor fuel tax and state use tax and all that stuff. I think, if I remember correctly, it was $500,000 for the 10 years or for each year?
It was over $500,000 in the general fund alone on an annual basis.
So on an annual basis?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if we are able to recapture that population, at least up to what we were in 2010, then every year it'd be 500,000.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Chandra.
I noticed in the packet thing about staff person for risk management. Have you discussed the benefits, drawbacks of having a staff person and whether or not that would play a part on having to ramp up the $400,000 annually?
So I've done a lot of thinking about that, Carol, and I have had a couple of conversations about that. It's very difficult to measure the impact of something that's not going to happen, right? So if, let's say we decided in next year's budget we want to add a risk management position, and the goal is to reduce claims, ultimately. It's very difficult to know what didn't happen.
Right.
So I feel like it would definitely be beneficial because now things are a little bit fragmented, and sometimes, honestly, we're just constantly playing catch up, trying to keep up with things. So could we be more attentive to managing some of our claims, particularly workers' compensation claims? Yes, we could.
So even, could that position be like a part-time position, or is it typically full-time?
That's something we would have to think about if we wanted to pursue it. I mean, so often it's more difficult to fill part-time positions, but it doesn't mean that it couldn't be. I know of city governments larger than the city of Urbana that have, a single full-time position, so potentially it could be a part-time.
Grace.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the update and presentation. I had a few things. Could we just go back and clarify when we were talking about increasing revenue and Chris's comment about raising the taxes, but to clarify, we're not talking about raising a tax rate, right? We're talking about raising the tax base by increased population, new developments. It sounds like there wasn't a proposal of increasing the tax rate. Is that right?
So we're not making any specific proposal at this time. But I think when you're looking to balance the budget, all of those things are options. Expenditure reductions, doing things that change the tax base, as well as changing tax rates or implementing new taxes or fees, which are, taxes and fees are fundamentally different things.
Thank you. And then talking about the census recount options, I was wondering, has there been more conversations on if we're going to do that, if it's worth it, or are we just going with increasing revenue in other ways, like increased population as the strategy?
So I'm going to ask if Carol or the mayor would like to jump in, but I mean, I think that's something that would require careful analysis, because if you're going, does have a significant cost, right? We have to pay for that special census. And so I think you want to make sure, or be reasonably assured, that if you spend the money to do that, that the benefit is actually there. But I'm not personally involved in that.
Yeah, that's a decision we'll have to make this year. As Elizabeth said, there's a benefit and a cost analysis we'll have to do. You have to identify the census tracts that you want to recount, and the expense of conducting the census, which is hiring the people, staffing up an office space, providing all the equipment. Every single expense related to this has to be borne by the city. So that has to be taken into account as well. But we'll have to make a decision this year. So,
thank you. And then with the $2 million in retained risk and the $7.5 million additional funding for capital improvements, this is something kind of an abstract plan put in the forecast that will come up in the next budgets. Is that right? Or is this already allocated as that?
No, correct. You approve the budget every year. So, you know, in the forecast, we built in the 7.5 million for capital improvements as 1.5 million each year for 5 years, but every one of those 5 years, the city council will have to approve a budget.
And then I'm trying to understand the retained risk fund and some of those numbers. I don't know if you possibly go back to that slide. Because I saw in your report here that we've had 1.85 million over the past 4 years. And then it looks like, is that an expected spending of 1.5 every year? And then we're doing 2 million over 5 years? I'm just trying to see how those numbers align.
So, correct. I mean, it's roughly, we have it growing over time, right? Based on our expectations about what's going to happen to insurance rates and how quickly claims are going to grow. But yes, it's, you know, 1.5 to 2 million spending anticipated each year. And that would be kind of for current claims each year. Plus, in that, at the very beginning, that lighter blue bar is the current reserves estimated that we need for claims that are currently open.
And so the past 4 years, those 1.5 million, there's some that's kind of still pending. Is that right? So it's not really representative of what would happen in the future?
Correct. So what's going to happen in the future is roughly based on an assessment of our claims over the past 5 years, right? So any new liability is based on what has happened in our experience.
Okay, and so the 2 million is just one time that'll be spread out over 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm trying to understand the reoccurring charge of 400,000 annually.
The 400,000 we built in as 100,000 a year increase for 4 years, so kind of building up slowly to that number. But we think that's what we really need to be sustainable based on what we're seeing with claims now.
And after the first 2 years of the one-time chunk, or?
So the one-time chunk would be 2024 and 2025, and I believe then we have the ramp up starting in 24 and then over 4 years.
Thank you. And then last clarifying question, the 2027 increases in reoccurring expenditures from the ARPA new positions, that is for the digital forensic and intelligence analyst positions with the police department,
Well, no,
right?
in fact, it's not designated for anything specific, but understanding that there are things that are currently being funded by ARPA that the city council may, at the end of that time period, want to continue in the future. So we didn't want to fail to recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. I just wanted to clarify that that was the cost that will be switched over, not have ARPA money to spend anymore if we continue those.
Correct,
right?
but it's a ballpark number, and we haven't identified a specific program or anything like that.
Okay, but I mean, we have the positions now, so it's a matter of if we keep them or not.
Correct, we have those positions now, and when they reach the end of their term, we'll have to make a decision about whether to keep them.
Thank you.
Chandra.
Will we be seeing the plans or ideas for increasing the revenue before the budget stuff comes up? What's the timeline for that?
I expect we'll have some conversations about that in March. I want to be clear, though, we're not in a situation where we have to increase revenues before July 1 to approve the budget for next year. That's not where we are. We've done careful planning and we have a little room to breathe, but I expect we'll start those conversations in March.
Okay, good, thank you.
Any other questions? James, did you have any questions?
No, I do not.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, we'll move on to the capital improvement plan for the mid-year update.
All right, good evening, Council, Mayor.
John and Carmen with us.
And we are going to step into the Let's see if I get full screen here. We'll definitely step into the mid-year update for the capital improvement plan. Real quick, we wanted to take this opportunity to recognize our engineering division. Wanted to just kind of show you some of the faces and names of our folks that make this capital improvement projects and a lot of other work that we do come together. We're really pleased to share this group with you. It's a great team that we're really proud of. And as I go through this, if you keep score, you'll notice that this is not the same engineering division from 5 years ago. This is a pretty different team that we've got. But we've got kind of starting in the bottom, working our way up. Wallace Arnold's our GIS specialist. He's been with us for 5 months. And we have big plans for our GIS data management and how we'll integrate with all processes of the city. And so Wallace is going to be a big part of that. We're really happy to have him. Dan Rothermel is our land surveyor. Has been with us for 4 years. And Dan just does a jack of all trades, really, things related to property, right-of-way, license agreements, franchise agreements, all sorts of things. Is this my property? Is it not my property? Dan's great at answering those questions. We have 4 civil engineering technicians. We have Kyle Dobus, who's been with us for just over a year. Kyle is our stormwater and erosion control technician. Chase Sinton's a civil engineer tech 2, has been with us for 4 years. Focuses on pavement asset management and other transportation work. Matt Graven's our newest hire at 3 months. Civil engineer technician 3, he focuses on our storm and sanitary sewers and asset management of those assets. And then Adam Shaw, civil engineering technician 3, been with us for 21 years. So there's very, very happy that Adam's carrying that experience forward with our group. He's our right-of-way technician and provides a lot of other support with development and capital improvement plan review. And then Carmen and I, we share a lot of similar roles as a city engineer and assistant city engineer, including implementing this capital improvement plan that we're going to talk about. A lot of project management role that we take on for that. Also development reviews and various other responsibilities that we have. And then, of course, we all report to Tim Cowan, Public Works Director, who's been with us for just over 2 years now. So thanks. Just wanted to take a chance to kind of share who our team is. We do have a couple of vacancies for civil engineering staff still. And I will say what this org chart does represent is our basically the same budget we've had for staff for a while, and we're about filled in the vacancies, so we're really excited about that as well. Yeah, thanks for humoring us with that, but I do want to step into this update as we're halfway through the fiscal year. So these updates will be as of the end of December 2022. We included about 8 pages in your packet, mostly tables and charts, as engineers love to do, and want to just at least get you a chance to get oriented with it. There is on page 8 a set of glossary of terms in case you're not familiar with some of the encumbrances and what do we mean by budget, what do we mean by plan and things like that. You definitely, and feel free to ask us questions as we get into this. I never used the word encumbered so much in my life before coming to the city. So on the first page, we have really just a snapshot here. I'll try to zoom out to the right view. The bar charts representing the full bar for each of the different funds is representing the current budget for that fund for this fiscal year. The largest one, I'll use the Capital Replacement and Improvement Fund as an example. So we have a $12.9 million current budget, and we break that up into four categories to illustrate that there's just under $1 million spent in that fund to date. About $1.8 million has been encumbered, and by that we mean it's under contract, but it's not been spent yet in the fiscal year. And then for the CR&I fund, for example, we expect to encumber another $1.4 million in the next 6 months, leaving about $8.8 million we expect will move forward to the next fiscal year or to another fiscal year after that. We'll have to move that we don't expect that we'll encumber that this year. And as we get through the different funds, we'll kind of step through those. We'll explain what are these these accounts that we're moving forward, we expect. But kind of as a big snapshot, we have in this summary table there, we have $5.2 million that we've spent in the first 6 months of the fiscal year. We have another $4.5 million that's under contract that hasn't been spent yet. And then we have $9.1 million that we anticipate we will encumber or get under contract within the next 6 months of the fiscal year. So just kind of looking at those three items together, what we expect we're going to complete in the remaining 6 months is about what we did in the first 6 months. So we expect to kind of stay on track with that progress. And then just, have a pretty healthy amount that we're going to be moving forward to next fiscal year, and we'll get into the details of that. Okay, so I'll, and feel free to interrupt us too with any questions you have. Stepping into the CR&I fund kind of summary sheet here, we've got the table showing for the different project lines, what is the original plan, the FY23 plan that was approved July 1st, and then what's the current budget or the revised budget, how much have we spent, how much is encumbered, and how much is available that we expect will be encumbered this year. And what we'll do is show some pie charts there on the bottom that really just kind of illustrate what's the difference between the July 1st budget and the budget at the end of December. One kind of accounting nuance, I guess, that I'll point out, this will happen in a few of these. The city facility improvements line, that's, fire stations, city building here, public works improvements. You see a FY23 plan of $7.9 million, a revised budget of $10.4 million. Well, we didn't add that much to the budget per se. That's really active purchase orders that were carried forward from the previous fiscal year. So that was money that was encumbered in FY22, wasn't spent yet. We moved it just automatically moves forward into the budget. So there's a little bit of nuance like that I'll try to touch on. Other things in the CR&I account, we did have, we do expect that there's going to be the EQL projects, for example. We're not going to get those bid for construction in this fiscal year. We're under design right now. We anticipate getting that encumbered in the next fiscal year. So you see that $1.9 million moving forward. And then for the facility improvements, you see a substantial fund balance moving forward to the next fiscal year or more, $6.9 million. And most of that is for the fire stations construction, because we know we're not going to start that construction in this fiscal year, but we're moving towards that, as you all are aware. So okay, yeah, like $5 million of that is fire station construction in the current budget, and $1.8 million is the public work campus rehab construction. So that's really a big chunk of the story of what's kind of moving forward to the next fiscal year. So that's the main thing for that one.
Hey, John. Okay, you said the EQL construction will be sent forward to the 2024 budget. Why was that again?
Because design won't be ready for bids to go, for it to go out to bid before June 30th.
Okay. Because we've been doing the EQL thing since, last fall, getting information from people? That's why I was wondering, why is it taking so long?
Right. Understandably, we didn't have the project selected until, I want to say, October. I forget whether it was I think it was October, this early fall of 2022. And so we needed time to design the projects before we can go to construction.
Okay, and we'll be doing that by contract from outside subcontract labor, or Public Works will be doing it?
No, we will be putting out for competitive bid by contractors, independent contractors.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, and I'll move forward to the locomotor fuel tax fund. And of course, we can come back to anything I want to discuss. So for the LMFT fund, it just kind of, a little more of the same thing. There's some purchase orders that were carried forward. That happened on the, Windsor Road legal fees. That was a contract we had from fiscal year 22 that carried forward. But we did do some budget amendments in this fund. As you may recall, we have, as we were kind of working forward, what projects we could get under contract for design in time. We weren't getting to the Florida James Cherry project in time, so we decided to push it back to the next fiscal year for construction. We're still going to do design this fiscal year, but as delaying that project, we took the opportunity to take funds from that account to supplement the street patching project, which had fairly high bids compared with what we were expecting. So this is just kind of an opportunity to, or really kind of forced our hand that we needed to find funds from somewhere else. And that's where it came from for the most part. And we also had oil and chip project up in the maintenance projects is another example of some higher bids that we had to contend with the budget amendment. But we expect that, and I expect that the annual joint seal and crack program will probably do some more money transfers with that as well to kind of make sure we bring that back closer to the 140,000 we originally had. But we'll kind of see how some of the other projects shake out before we get there. And the only project that we've added to the capital improvement plan since July 1 is this Lincoln Washington to Killarney, it's not a new project. It just wasn't expected to have any expenditures this year. And that's because we pursued the Safe Streets for All grant back in September. We used some funds to hire a consultant to aid us with that application. The State Motor Fuel Tax Fund, moving on to the next page. Got definitely a lot of activity, a lot of money we're spending on this account. And this one had some big purchase orders that were carried forward from the previous fiscal year, like the Lincoln and Springfield and the Race Street construction projects. That is why we went from a planned budget of $6.9 million to a revised budget of $9.1 million. That was really those construction projects were still active. Other than that, not large budget amendments or transfers that have gone on in this account. One thing that the Philo Colorado Anderson project design was a little bit delayed because when we did the pavement cores and really the pavement assessment of the existing pavement, we realized that the scope of work we hoped we'd be able to do wasn't going to be achievable. Some of the pavement was just in too bad a condition. So delayed design a little bit, and we'll have to get that project out to bid in November rather than middle of the year like we were originally planning. Yep.
I'm on. So just like John has done, I'm only going to talk about the line items that have had some changes from our fiscal 23 plan. So for the stormwater fund, starting with the first line, 40400, stormwater sewer miscellaneous repairs, you see a revised budget increase there, but that's actually just work that is carried over from a purchase order that was started in the previous fiscal year. So those are storm sewer repairs that are done on an as-needed basis. Moving down a couple lines to 40405, the Boneyard Creek maintenance. These funds that are shown here are actually for design, but we will be starting construction this year. So it's repairs along the Boneyard Creek where there's a lot of bank erosion and there's some stabilization needed. So we will see a budget amendment for that within this fiscal year for the construction funds there. Going down to 40412, the stormwater management planning. The increase you're seeing here from the the plan to the revised budget is a carryover from the previous fiscal year. It's for the Stormwater Master Plan. Around 102,000 was allocated for that. And the rest of the money is planned for GIS information gathering. So that's why there's 2 dates there and 2 different statuses. So the Stormwater Master Plan is the study, and we'll have an RFP going out pretty soon for gathering information about our storm sewer system that'll go into our GIS maps for the rest of that. 40414, right below that, the Boneyard Creek Crossing. This is getting moved to the next fiscal year. This is some civil engineering design work to trap sediment to prevent it from building up at the Boneyard Creek Crossing. So it'll be a sediment trap and some stream naturalization. And this is getting pushed back because we've applied for a grant fund called 319 grant through Illinois EPA, and we're waiting to hear back about that. The next one after that is the last one I'll touch on with this one, the Phillips Recreation daylighting. With this one, there was some recent bridge inspection done, and the condition that was found on this bridge didn't warrant an immediate study for this work, so it's being pushed to a later year. Okay. Sanitary sewer fund, just a couple I'll touch on here. The very first line, similar to the storm sewer miscellaneous repairs, the increased amount you're seeing in the revised budget is just a carryover from a previous fiscal year purchase order. So these are as needed miscellaneous repairs on the sanitary sewer system. A few lines down, the Carl Sanitary Sewer Project, that is, the planning portion is underway. The first line, the study, is under contract right now, the $52,100. But the design portion that'll happen after this planning, so that's the rest of this $160,000 budget, will be pushed to next year. We have a slow start with that because we had a consultant that was supposed to be under contract last year that we pulled out. We had to find a new consultant to do that work. And then the line after that, the construction on that sanitary sewer is getting pushed back as well just because of that delay with the consultant. And everything else is moving along as planned.
We have some questions. Can I guess because it sounds like we keep moving stuff back. Isn't that going to affect the cost of what or the balances, the monies that we have budgeted to do these particular projects? Because I'm thinking inflation, so on and so forth. What is it called? Chip line, whatever you call it, stuff not coming in. Not to mention that there seems to be a shortage of labor that is capable of these skills. So, do you tell me what you foresee in particularly? Of course, I'm thinking about the sewer lines and the lining. If you can tell me if there's going to be some type of, do you anticipate there being some type of continued obstruction to anything being started on time?
Sure. So I think I can answer your question a few ways. One, you're right. Whatever projects we don't start this year, there's the risk of costs increasing, which, how much is really a question, how much the costs increase. And so it's no better time than now to get projects started. Mm-hmm. I would say what this progress represents is what we were able to manage and move forward with the staff we currently have managing these projects, which is part of why we're trying to get civil engineers hired as well to help us manage these projects. And that's, if we have these projects that get delayed, there's a couple of things that are going to happen. Either we're going to have to then, it's going to make other projects down the priority list delayed as well, or we'll be able to do less of those improvements because the costs have gone up. Yeah, so there is consequences to that for sure.
I just worry that projects that we're talking about, even with the ARPA funds right now, will those get backed up as well? Or is this, I know this is your capital facilities budget, but I also know that the city applied for additional funds for certain things. Will those particular projects also be put on pause, even though we have the funds to do them now?
Well, that is the challenge. I mean, for some of the ARPA projects, we will be the, staff implementing them. And so we'll have to work with council to make those decisions of, how do we prioritize which ones we're going to implement, with the staff we have. But the biggest part of what happens with this capital improvement plan is that we don't do a majority of this work ourselves. We hire consulting engineering firms. Most of the work is done by contractors from select competitive bidding. And so, if we can find the right ways to balance what the work is done by city staff and what work is done by outside sources, that'll be our best way to get forward with it.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to put in a plug for hiring more civil engineers on our team. In my ARPA application, I did include staff budget in there to help pay for additional team members.
It just seems like we're having and not just Urbana, but nationally. It seems like there's an issue with finding people to fulfill those particular positions. So I'm sure that means that we're suffering from that same thing. So I just wanted to kind of get an idea of what you guys are thinking too. I'm worried that it'll be an issue. I mean, I've been waiting 6 months for refrigerator filters, so it's just one of those things where I wonder if we have to keep putting stuff back. How, is it because of supplies? Is it because lack of personnel, or people that know how to do, or trained to do this work? How that's going to go?
No, and that is the big challenge with the job that we face. I mean, all that you touched on, those are all limited resources. We have limited funds, we have limited staff availability, and honestly, we have limitations on how many consultants and contractors have availability as well. We encountered some of that with this fall. Just contractors were full up, and we're doing multiple projects. So I feel like the best thing that we can do, especially with council's input, is define what are those priorities that we're going to put first. We're going to make sure that those are the things we get attention to first and try to get moving along. And I expect that we're going to have ambitious plans and continue to have ambitious plans because we have a lot of work to do. And I wouldn't be surprised if sometimes our plans are ambitious and we can't fulfill them.
Okay, thank you.
And then I've just got this last page with the community development grants projects, the community development block grants and the Central TIF one. So from the CDBG, working with Sheila Dodd and her team to spend the CDBG money on some low and moderate income neighborhoods, especially focused on sidewalks, and using some of that for miscellaneous traffic studies as well, some speed studies. We are doing our best to get that CDBG money spent by May to help Sheila along with her spending goals. We're getting pretty close. We may not get all of it there, but we definitely getting her closer to that goal. And then the Boneyard Creek crossing, we did an electrical study, kind of studying the making repairs and enhancements to the current improvements there at Ray Street, and we had an electrical study out of the Central TIF project for that. So that is our update. Be happy to answer whatever questions.
Chris.
Thank you for the presentation. So When we talk about city facility improvement, and we're talking about the fire stations and all that, 7.9 million this year, 10 million next year. That's debt, right? I mean, that's projected debt. We don't have that money. We plan to go into debt for that money, right?
Chris, this is Tim. I'm just going to jump in on some of the facilities stuff
Yeah,
that
sure.
Carmen and John aren't quite as engaged on. First, the 7 and 10 million, that's essentially one and the same. That's 10 million essentially is the revised budget for this year. But some of the scoping that we've been doing for the fire stations, that number is still a little viscous. We're trying to pin that down. Conceptually, the idea is we've got the draft program from council. We've got the community engagement now, and we've closed that up. We need to kind of tally that information that we got from community engagement and then push forward. The next step is us doing some analytics as staff to provide to you as council options of how we fund that. Bonding could be part of that, rate adjustments. I think we offered 5 or 6 or 7 kind of considerations that we gauged your guys' input in to kind of consider, but that'll kind of be one of the next steps is once we have the program and budget kind of set up, we'll talk with FGMA about getting going on the design while simultaneously we present funding options and plans for your consideration.
Thank you.
Mary Alice.
Thank you for putting all together these numbers. There's still a little bit of time to process them. If you wouldn't mind switching back to the first slide that you had. So my question is that we do this quite frequently where we start a project one fiscal year and then we complete the project another fiscal year, especially for really large projects. And so we're usually kind of kicking the funding for that project to the next fiscal year. So the dark blue line is the actual spent. Is that the actual spent including projects that we're kind of wrapping up this fiscal year, or is that just for projects that were this fiscal year?
You're right. That's a great point. The actual spent does include purchase orders that were started before this fiscal year.
Okay,
That's right.
so if we just kind of look, it's very difficult to look at, okay, here's a capital improvement plan for this fiscal year because there are a lot of moving pieces. But basically, we have actually paid out about almost $1 million in capital improvement, in the CRI.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Correct.
Thank you.
You bet.
Grace.
Thank you. Thanks again for the presentation. I think this question is kind of along some of the lines of Mary Alice's question, because it seems kind of worrisome with like the revised budget increasing in all of these aspects. And you said that's because a lot of it is carryover from last year or other contracts. So we're not really increasing, like we're not going to have budget amendments to increase it by that much. It was what was already carried over, right? Okay. Much less scary. And the next question was, in all of the breakdown here, so if there's an available budget, but it's not moved to FY24, then that means we plan to spend it this year?
Plan to encumber it.
Okay.
Get a contract started or spend it, yeah.
And
Yeah.
if not, I imagine then we'll carry it over later, whatever we don't, right?
Exactly, like Elizabeth had said. These are predictions, of course, and we're going to see how it plays out, but that's what we expect, yeah.
Okay. And so my next questions were about the equity and quality of life projects. And so I think we didn't include that in this current year's budget, right? So this was rolled over still from the previous year. That was my recollection, maybe not. And so other question too, it says available funds is 100,000. Should that be in the encumbered column, actually?
Good catch, Grace. What I'm doing with that is I expect that the design, I've got a design proposal like on my desk now after review. I expect that I'll have about 100,000 coming out of the EQL budget for that design, money coming out of the CDBG sidewalks. So that as an expectation of that money will get encumbered this year. Just hasn't quite yet.
Okay, so that should be encumbered and then 1.9 million available and moved over, right?
It's available because this is like as of December 31st, 2022. So it wasn't encumbered then.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just like a snapshot.
Okay, well, we plan to.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Thank you. And then my other question was if there's a plan for more equal stuff in the future, which I guess is maybe, not ultimately your department's decision, but I guess the question would be how, I guess, you feel about it, like how this went, if you feel like we're in a position to, since we're still trying to do the ones from a year ago, kind of your thoughts on if we're in a position to do it again, and if so, when, what kind of scope?
Definitely. Well, I've been really encouraged by the input we got from the public, the ideas and the projects we got. From my perspective, there's a lot of opportunity to do more projects like that. And so if this is the kind of thing that council would like to fund special projects like that, I think there's a lot of need out there, and I think it's a neat thing for us to. Neat makes it sound bad, is a great thing for us to pursue.
If I could just add something to it, I think what we would probably be proposing in the future is, what we created what you could think of them as layers when we had the rating system. So we were looking at things like crime, and we were looking at things like safety of pedestrians and bicyclists and stuff like that. That's all information that we have. And I think to the point maybe that Sharice was trying to make, it was really labor intensive the way that we did this, but we wanted to get proposals from the public. And then we had to rack and stack all of that. I think we know all those things. We know where the target areas should be, so we might just kind of leap to, these are things that we would recommend going forward, and we don't need the public to tell us. We have the information that we need to know when we put equity first, these are the places we should go. So I think we might modify it so we can get to the answers quicker the next time.
Great. Thank you for adding into that. Thank you guys for the presentation. And I'm definitely on board with doing another round of equal stuff or just having that be a regular occurring thing, whatever we can manage to keep up with. Thank you.
Any other questions? Chandra?
On the annual pavement marking program, there's a negative available budget. Am I reading that correct? And does that mean like you'll have to transfer some things to, I don't know.
I have to see what happened with that.
Okay. And then additionally, the CDBG sidewalks, like you said something about the equal and the CDBG sidewalks. How does that differ from like the other sidewalks in CRI?
Excellent. Okay, so this is kind of my beautiful mind thing that I'm doing with sidewalks this year. So I'm glad everybody got that reference. So the CDBG money is really limited into what census blocks that we can spend it in.
Right.
And so, and also it's limited to reconstruction or new construction. So if we come across just repair or maintenance kind of items for sidewalk in those areas, like grinding the sidewalks, we found that there was like 2,000 feet of sidewalk to grind, so we can get rid of some of those bumps. We couldn't pay for it with CDBG money, but we could pay for it with CR&I money. So I've got lined up CDBG, CR&I, and equal money for kind of these different, what I can use those funds for. Obviously we got the equal projects specifically. But we are using, because a lot of the equal projects are in CDBG areas, we are using some of the CDBG money for design for the equal projects, because we can get that done now, trying to spend Sheila's money by a deadline, basically. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to council input and communication. Grace.
Thank you. I just want to say congratulations to the fire department promotions, and it's great to see everyone out for that. Also want to say thank you to everyone who presented tonight, the public who stuck with us, and everyone who's been engaging with us so far. I also wanted to thank and appreciate CPRB members for joining us last week, and I really appreciated having that conversation. I look forward to more conversations with them in the future. I will follow up, what I can to make that happen. I think it would also would be appreciated for me if executive was interested or has any extra capacity to help coordinating between CPRB and City Council in kind of future discussions. I'm not exactly sure how like joint sessions work, so we could talk all in public and something like that. So I'm definitely open for ideas on how to have more conversations with them in the future. Thank you.
Anyone else? I've been asked to remind folks, you should have gotten an email today to schedule a briefing by Public Works on the subdivision updates that are in the works. So please answer the doodle as soon as you can. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to unfinished business. There is none. Reports of standing committees, there are none. Committee of the Whole. Councilmember Wu.
All right, we have a long consent agenda, so please bear with me. Actually, everything moving forward from the Committee of the Whole is on the consent agenda, so I'll go through them. So on behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I move approval of the consent agenda, which includes resolution number 2023-01001, resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an Urbana Home Consortium subrecipient agreement with the Cunningham Township Supervisor's Office called Bridge to Home for the Home ARP fiscal year 2021-2022. And resolution number 2023-01002, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an Urbana Home Consortium subrecipient agreement with Champaign County Healthcare Consumers. Claudia, I think, is in the back. Thanks for attending. Special Populations Case Management Program for the Home ARP fiscal year 2021 to 2022, and resolution number 2023-01003, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an Urbana Home Consortium subrecipient agreement with the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission Housing Navigation Program with the Home ARP fiscal year 2021-2022 years. And resolution number 2023-01004, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an Urbana Home Consortium subrecipient agreement with See You at Home Housing Navigation Program with Home ARP fiscal year 2021-2022. And resolution number 2023-01005, a resolution not to protest a proposed text amendment to the Champaign County zoning ordinance. And ordinance number 2023-01002, an ordinance amending the Urbana zoning map R3 to B3 at 1009 Cunningham Avenue, which is plan case number 2462 M22. And finally, ordinance number 2023-01003, an ordinance approving a special use permit for solar farm at 1210 East University Avenue, which is plan case 2464 SU22.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Mary Alice, seconded by Chandra. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
That motion passes. That may have been a record number of items on the consent agenda. I'm not sure. All right, we'll move on to the regular agenda. Nothing on that one. Reports of special committees. We don't have any. Reports of officers. Seeing any. New business, none listed. We'll move on to a discussion for the American Rescue Plan. Continuing discussion. Will Kolchowski will kick us off here.
All right. Well, first off, thank you for everybody to getting me the initial allocations.
Is your microphone on, Will?
Yes, but I don't think I'm close enough.
Okay, thank you.
So first off, thanks for everybody to get it to me. I sent out a draft early this afternoon with kind of all that put together. I think the main thing from what I sent to look at are kind of the average funding allotment and the median. You'll see next to it the standard deviation, and I call it the average funding allotment standardized. I think it's best just to ignore those. The standard deviation that calculation is slightly incorrect. It was pulling from something that, it was missing one person's values for the standard deviation. It didn't change too much. And then the average funding allotment standardized, I think it's too convoluted and too complicated from what I was hoping it might show. And it doesn't really show anything different than the average funding or the median funding allotment. So the average funding is just the average of the 8 responses received, and the median is just the middle one. And since there was 8, it's the value between 4 and 5 is what it is. So what you have in front of you is just kind of the totals, all the comments kind of all in one spot. So the average was really close to about $10 million. The average, what I sent you there's also a small error, which that's too quick of a turnaround to proofread everything, but some of the responses had blanks instead of zeros. So for the projects at the bottom of the list where there was not a lot of support, those averages are slightly lower than what I sent out today. So there's a little bit of difference between the average allocated under the average and what it actually is. So small detail, but relatively inconsequential. Maybe. So that's really all I have, is to kind of go over the worksheet real quickly. If there's more questions that anybody has, I'm happy to kind of go through it in a little bit more detail. But that's really all I have.
Well, I'll follow up with that. And first of all, I want to appreciate the work that was done last week during the meeting. You moved ahead quite a bit in this whole process. Just for the public's information, the assignment again for this week was for council members and myself to recommend funding amounts for projects that previously had been categorized into one of 2 buckets, either the leaning yes and the maybe buckets. Last week, the council came to a consensus that projects in the leaning no bucket would be eliminated from consideration. And again, we have about $10 million to allocate. So to summarize what's on the sheet, and each should have a copy of the spreadsheet paper form in front of you. There were 21 proposals in the leaning yes bucket and 12 proposals left in the maybe bucket. For each proposal, the 8 of us, that's 7 council members and myself, were asked to allocate a funding amount for individual projects. This resulted in 25 projects that were recommended for some funding by 5 or more people. 7 proposals had 2 or fewer people recommending funding. 1 proposal had 3 people supporting funding, and no project had just 4 people funding it. So what all this means, it's pretty clear divide. There's a clear divide emerging here between proposals that are supported by at least 5 people and those supported by 2 or less. And you'll see that that number is listed in the column that's titled Number of Allocations. So what Will did was compile everyone's allocations, summarized all the comments submitted. He calculated the average funding allotments and the median funding allotments. Averages are calculated by adding up all the individual allocations, including the zeros, dividing by 8. The median is the middle value when allocations are lined up lowest to highest, where half the allocations are larger, half are smaller than the median. If there's an even number of value, and we have 8 values for each of these projects, the middle pair of allocations are added together, divided by 2 to get the median value. That takes me back to Statistics 101. If you look at the top 25 projects, again, and this is where 5 or more people recommended funding, which are on your spreadsheet are listed. These are the projects that go through the Hope Village Carl Foundation Hospital project. The median funding allotment totals $9.9 million approximately. The average allotment totals $9.5 million. So we're very close to the $10 million total just with those top 25 projects. And I hope you all think that makes our job easier. I do want to report, as you know, last week I was at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, attended many sessions. One of those was on ARPA best practices. It was top of mind among many mayors anyway last week. So this was a session led by the Chief COVID Recovery Officer for the U.S. Department of Treasury. And one of the 2 messages coming out of Treasury last week was this. Number 1, he encourage cities to obligate their funds as soon as possible because the potential for Congress to sequester unobligated ARPA funds grows daily as the government deals with budget issues. So that made national news last week. So it means many cities are still kind of where we are in this process, but he encouraged those of us who are still considering what to do with our ARPA funds to make those decisions as soon as we possibly can. And secondly, he emphasized that we need to make sure we have an independent compliance effort that will focus going forward on measuring and evaluating the outcomes for all the projects that we fund, because the Treasury will be monitoring how these funds are used through the reports that we make, and cities ultimately are accountable to the federal government for proper expenditure of these funds. So timely allocations and ongoing monitoring, ensuring compliance with how these are funded. So it was an incredibly useful session, actually. So along those lines, and as a starting point, and I put this out as a suggestion, I recommend that we focus tonight beginning on the 6 projects that had funding support from all 8 of us. And those, again, in the column that says number of allocations, the number there is listed. We could discuss the individual allocations for these proposals and hopefully come to a consensus on a tentative allocation for those. And then we could move on to discuss the 11 projects that had funding support from 7 of the 8 of us, and so on through 6 and 5. And again, I want to remind people, no formal action is going to be taken tonight. No votes are going to be made on this. The goal here is to develop the entire list of projects to be funded, to be voted on as a package, and then to attach any conditions that you want to be attached to the funding or written into the agreements. So we have if you're amenable to that starting point. Yes, Mary Alice.
I just want to confirm, because I'm looking at the spreadsheet, I want to confirm what Will had said about it. So did you say that the average and the median funding were missing one person, or the standard deviation was missing one person?
The standard deviation, so the average and the median are correct.
Okay.
Except when you get to the averages at the very bottom of the list, that only had maybe 1 or 2 supporters. Some of the ones that should have been 0 were just blank, and then so the average didn't quite calculate out of a basis of 8. So some of the very bottom ones, the average was slightly lower, but the median is correct for all of them.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So just as an example, first item on the list is the Urbana School District 116 Alternative Education Project. The average funding allotment came out to be $715,598, and the median was $814,375. So, Grace.
Thank you. Trying to get caught up, understand some things too. I thought that last week we already eliminated the ones that are kind of at the bottom of this list. Is that not right?
Those were still classified as maybes.
Okay, I'm gonna have to rewatch because that's not what I recall. I thought we added another, and then we eliminated those ones that now had.
I'd have to look at both lists, but I believe there was 3 that were eliminated between last week and this week that are not on this list here. There was, I think, 11 the first time that we moved, and then we moved the additional leaning nose that was only the bottom 3. So I believe this list is correct and includes the ones that were removed.
Okay, yeah, I was under the wrong impression then, so I didn't include those, although I would have otherwise. I didn't know if you could explain the visual allotment distribution. I'm trying to understand your bars there.
Yeah, those are just bar graphs of instead of trying more columns for each person's allocations, those bar graphs represent each person's allocations. And then I think the bottom for each one is 0, I believe. Although the little function in Excel, I think, might adjust manually. So it just kind of gives you an idea. I could just call it the visual representation more because you kind of see where the spread is. you know, whether or not people agreed or whether there was some variance between what people were thinking. So that's just an extra tool to try to see what your fellow council members were thinking in relation to what you were.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I love visuals. And so green is full funding, blue is partial, and red is the lowest, or?
Green is the highest, so if you see multiple greens, it's tied. Red is the lowest, and then blue's in the middle.
Thank you.
And those bars represent peoples going from left to right as you're looking at us up here.
So green, blue, red, I'm
Hang on a
sorry.
second, Chandra?
I'm sorry.
Well, if she has a question about the bars, because I was just gonna
Yeah,
ask about.
I just
something
wanted
else.
to know if the green, blue, red is like from highest priority to lowest priority, or?
No, so that's a function of the allocation amount relative to the average. So if on the little charts, the red one is one that is the lowest. The green one is the highest amount somebody recommended for funding.
Oh, that's what I want.
Some of the, you don't see a lot of red ones because I think when it gets down to zero, the red ones just doesn't exist. So that's what the red and green is.
Chandra?
Okay, so if we're starting at number one, are we looking at the rationale that was submitted and then discussing whether or not we want to go with the median or the average funding allotment, or if, you know, are we saying, like, since the average is 715,000, am I supposed to say, you know what, I think we need less than that or more than that? Is that the discussion?
Yeah, the goal would be to come up with a number that we can get consensus on.
Okay.
Hopefully somewhere in the vicinity of maximum, average, or median. Mary Alice?
So I would like to start with saying that I think it would be good if we kind of focused on the median allocation. It's something that is used a lot of times when we think of poverty and we think of household income and so forth. And just looking at the standard deviations, although they might be a little off, there's some pretty high standard deviations here, which says to me you have some outliers. So we have some low outliers and some high outliers, which is why I think we should focus on the median funding allotment. That's my opinion. So that's where I would start.
Any other comments? Thoughts? Sharice?
Okay, so Mary Alice, you don't think we should focus on the average funding allotment, just the median funding allotment?
Correct.
Okay.
It accounts for the outliers, the median does.
Okay.
Here's my Stats 101 presentation.
Didn't get stats.
So does the median add up to 9.9 or the average adds up to 9.9?
The median averages up to 9.878538.
Okay.
The average that I sent you out earlier was, I think, 10 something. The correct average that they all add up to is 9.961849. So it's a little bit different. The numbers that are different are the ones at the very bottom anyway. So.
Grace?
Thanks. I think overall I agree with going with the median, at least for our starting points. There's some that I think it's worth having still further discussion on on them individually, but I think that overall, starting with the median, I think is a good strategy.
Is there a number? You want to start with the number that's proposed here?
I mean, I would look at the rationale, I guess, and I didn't actually put in. Because if this is the median funding, what does that cover? Like if they asked for, oh, it's almost completely funded.
They requested 850,000.
Yeah.
The median is listed at 814,375. Grace?
I think this is another thing too. We mentioned in past conversations good points about having increments that make sense, and I think that that is relevant for a lot of these if it's a certain number of positions or a certain number of years. And I think that others, it's not so relevant because it's a whole capital fundraising campaign towards a big thing. So I think that some of them have meaningful increments and some don't, and I think some of those are more clear than others where they fall if there is a limiting increment or if a general contribution is still very helpful for them.
Sharice?
Okay, there are two things I want to say. Because Grace said, at least starting out, we can start out with the median. I think if we're going to do the median, we need to stick with the median so that it's consistent all the way through, not, you know what I mean? If we're going to start off with saying that we will allot monies from the median column, we're not going to switch over to the average column. We're going to stay with the median column. Is that make sense?
I think we have consensus on that. I think Grace
Okay.
was referring
Yeah, well, she just said to start off with, so that's why I wanted to understand what she meant by that.
Because in my mind, there would still be further discussion. It's not just we go with the median automatically.
No, all I'm saying is just being consistent. If that's what we're starting off with, we're not going to switch over to,
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So the second thing I wanted to say was, I think as far as amounts and what we're thinking about is, I know that people specified certain things like, staff, blah, 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 blah. And if we are not going to allot the entire amount, some things, like Grace said, some things are just blanket, boom. Well, I guess my way of thinking about it is that it's all blanket, boom. So it's like, we hit like city stuff, this is what they wanted, and I'm not going to, I think that the projects that we're talking about allotting or giving monies to, after we allot those monies to them, and if it's not the amount that they necessarily wanted, then it's their responsibility to decide how they're going to divvy up the funds after they get it. It's not like they don't have an idea of what they're going to do. They do. But it's like when instead of us giving you $40,000, we're giving you $35,006. And if that's going to mean that you don't get a particular staff person or you can't get the new electrical thing that you might want or something like that, then I'm sure there's somewhere else where that money, where you can add that money to something else that is needed. You see what I'm saying? I don't think it's our job to actually try to determine what they're going to end up using it for if they already have the idea of, they've already given us that kind of thing.
Mary Alice?
The only thing I would say to that is, I think in some instances you're right. So let's just go with this example for a moment. So Urbana School District, if we give them the median, they're going to have to cut or find funding to fill the gap between 850 and 814. But and I'll just use another example, which is sometimes I had certain things that I was like, well, I'm willing to fund this part of it, but this part I don't think should be funded. All right, so
And those are the conditions.
Those are the conditions.
Yes.
So I do think that there is some discussion, depending on what the project is, in terms of what council's willing to fund out of whatever they're doing. And I'll just give you one really quick example. I said that I thought that Eastern Food Bank should get one cargo van instead of two. I mean, that's just an easy one to, say, okay, we'll fund one, but we won't fund the other one. So in some instances, I think we will have to discuss those particulars. And in some instances, it just, doesn't make sense. So the Urbana Park Health District, we're not going to tell them not to build a certain component of it. They're going to have to either fill the funding gap or they're going to have to figure out like what piece they're not going to fill. We would just say the money would go to building the Health and Wellness Center. So I think the answer is both. Sometimes we will and sometimes we won't have to discuss what they're going to spend it on.
So for the adult ed, I think it falls into that first category of they can make the decision on how to spend 815 out of the 850, if that's the number you want to go with.
I'm fine with that.
I have a question about line number 8, which is Urbana Neighborhood Connection Center. How is
We're
it possible
not there yet,
that
James.
the median...
We're not there yet, James.
Well, I have a question about how the spreadsheet is working here, because line number 8 has a peak request of 100,000 and a minimum request of 70,000, and it looks like there's some variance. How did it end up with a median of 100,000?
Because I know how it did it. There's 6 full funded on
So-
there.
At least the top five were for the full amount, so that the average between responses number 4 and 5 was still the full amount. So the average, since there was some lower, was below that, and then the minimum was 70,000.
Right. So how do you calculate the median again?
The median is if you have 8 responses, starting from the highest to lowest, between the 4th and the 5th would be median. So it's the middle amount, and since there's an even number, it takes the average
okay.
of between
Thank
4 and
you.
5.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, let's go back up to the top. Jaya.
So, sorry, just one further thing. I do think this approach is starting with the median, but just keeping in mind these are initial recommendations, right? Because if we go through and we find that we have made recommendations for more or less, right, there might need to be adjustments. So I think just kind of adding to that conversation, good starting point that we might need to finesse some of this. And in some cases, folks might be able to kind of say, okay, this is what we'll do with what you're allocating, but we also might need to go back once we've gone all the way through to.
Again, this is tentative. The idea is to come up with a draft and then.
Just want to make sure people understand, if we say, for this first one, 814, 375, that, the school district isn't like, yes, until we're done.
Correct, we're not done. This is the first iteration, version 1.0. Okay. Shall we put 815 as a tentative? Okay. Our head nods.
Yes.
Thumbs up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Where's James? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Sorry.
James, are you thumbs up or thumbs down for 815?
Yeah, I said yes.
Yes, okay.
That's enough.
Okay. Next item on the list is Urbana Park District Health and Wellness Center. The requested funding was $3.3 million. Minimum funding allotment recommended was $1 million. Maximum was $3 million. Median is at $2 million. Comments? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
I'm thumbs up for that.
Okay, thumbs up at $2 million. Next item on the list is, which had 8 members supporting funding, is the sanitary sewer lining pilot program. Requested funding amount was $1.296 million. Minimum funding allotment was at $500,000, maximum at $1.3 million. The median funding allotment is $1.296. Thumbs up? Hands up. Okay, Grace.
Thank you. This is a project that I very much support. The reason why I didn't do full funding is because of we know that we have other funds that can be used, and some with remaining CDBG money if we do future equals projects. So that was my thought in not full funding, is I do support having that full amount going towards this project. I just still have some of those detailed kind of questions about what's necessary from ARPA, and is there some other funds of other pools that we can use towards this to maintain some of this ARPA funding for other projects that might not be eligible for that.
Any other council member comments? Thumbs up at
Just
1.296. James?
Yeah, I'm thumbs up. I just have a quick question. Will residents be required to opt into this?
Residents have already voted
They
to
will-
accept it.
Because the
No,
laterals.
I mean individual residents. Can an individual resident decide, yes, I want to do this, or no, I don't?
Okay, I'm going to answer now.
You've got Tim. and-
Well, yeah, but I know the answer too. Go ahead, Tim.
And so do I.
Yes, because this is technically their infrastructure. They have to sign off on us accessing it to do the work. So if someone didn't want us to do it, it would be on a case-by-case scenario. The hope is for
It's possible we
100%
could get.
desire.
Yeah, it seems unlikely, but it is possible we could get to the end of this and not use it all, because this number is based on everybody saying, yes, please do this to my pipe.
That's correct.
Well, and that would just make it
Thank you.
available for other pipes to be lined.
I don't know if I can speak or not, but I was just going to say the other opportunity is that program can expand. So if we have 90% in our target area, we could expand that out by 10% potentially. We have other needs.
Comment?
Okay, thank you.
Sharice?
I just want to say that, James, I've worked very hard with this particular group regarding this project, and this very project was actually introduced in a community meeting that me and Mr. Lewis held, and we voted to accept this. So I think for the most part, there won't be many opting outs of regarding this particular project.
Okay, 1.296 or 1.296 million is the median funding. Thumbs up? Thumbs up or down, James?
Up.
Okay, 6 of 8. Okay. All right, moving down to Cunningham Township Supervisor's Office, Bridge to Home. We're doing 8s. Yep, we're doing 8s. So the next 8 is Cunningham Township Supervisor's Office, Bridge to Home. The request was for $1,199,452. Minimum funding allotted was $300,000. Maximum was $1,484,000. The median funding allotment is $685,437. Grace.
Thank you. I'm in support of more funding for this one, and I think that with the median, one of the things I'm finding interesting, a little strange, is that to me it also seems like an arbitrary amount. Like this is just the middle value. Someone could have put 690 or 680. It's, the 685, 437 seems like a very specific, seemingly kind of arbitrary number. So I guess I'm curious on, whoever put that middle amount, why that very specific amount.
Could be
Since-
the
Two
average.
middles.
Since there's 8, the median is actually calculated as the average between 4 and 5, since there's only 8. So if there was 9, it would just be the 5th value. Since there's an even number, it's technically, so it could be, it's a number on either side of those that's causing that one. So that's not an individual response.
Thank you. Makes sense. And I appreciate your work on that. I think the question still stands, like, why did those two middle people pick that number? Whether one was 680, one was 690, why that amount?
Jaya.
I think Mary Alice had her hand up first, sorry.
Mary Alice.
I actually think this is one that we might want to kind of put on hold, and my rationale for that is if we give them, there was many things as part of this proposal, and if we give them either the 800 or the 685,000, we still have to say, okay, we're willing to fund this, this, and this with these funds. So this one's going to be a harder one because it's not an infrastructure project, right? This is something that we're going to have to say, if we give you X number of dollars, this is what we want it to go towards. That makes sense.
Yeah, and just reading the comments, there were some council members did have specific items they wanted to fund and other, and
Yeah, if I can say something, I agree with Mary Alice because I will tell you I am the outlier on this. I actually put more than was requested because I thought some of the other programs that were proposed should be done in conjunction with Cunningham Township. And so I thought that some of the things that I didn't fund expressly might be served by this proposal if it had additional money.
so I'm hearing maybe we just want to put this one on hold. Sure, if that's what you'd like. Sure. Okay, let's tackle it. What conditions? Did anyone have conditions? Chris?
Well, my first condition was I wanted full funding for the rental assistance at $390,000.
And how much, Chris?
The full 390.
390, okay.
That they were asking for. And then where there might be some wiggle room here is in their personnel budget, which was, and I'm forgetting how much they were asking, substantially more, but we could reduce the personnel. But I don't understand, like, you know, like how much each personnel is getting. So I don't know, what eliminating 2 people would cost. I don't know. The other thing they have on there is something about what I want to call a rehabilitation of actual architecture, and I don't understand what they're trying to do.
I believe that was for the California Street properties to bring them up to handicap access. In fact, that was one of the, I also funded rental assistance plus the facilities improvement, but not the personnel figures. I think the facilities was about 215. Didn't bring my notebook down. Jaya, go ahead.
I was going to echo, I had the same logic that you just described of the tenant-based rental assistance and those improvements. And this is something people are going to hear me say over and over again. Unless there was a very clear plan for sustainability for staffing, it is not something that I was supportive of in general. I think, if it's something that there's a demonstrated, this is why we need it short-term, or, these are the alternative funds we have lined up to fund it beyond this. That's really different, but this is one-time money, and so looking at one-time costs is where I focused, and so for this one, it was those expenses that had already been listed.
Chandra?
I think I added in the housing navigation when I originally did this, but then I think after last week, when we approved, or whatever week that was, we approved the HHI funds with RPC doing housing navigation, so I don't know if that would be 2, I guess, entities in the community doing the same thing, and whether or not that was an arm that needed to be funded. But I definitely wanted to fund the rental assistance.
Rental assistance, okay. Mary Alice?
Yeah, I agree with the rental assistance, and actually, to James' point, on my spreadsheet, I actually added in some money, rather than in the Cunningham Township allocation, for the other 2 agencies that were asking for rental assistance, and so I actually gave 100,000 there, but I said, Cunningham Township should manage that. So at the end of the day, I said 500,000 for rental assistance, with those 3 buckets. I would be fine with doing the rental assistant plus the California items. I would be good with that.
So we'll just need to go back to the budget and look at the proposal to see what that, any other input on this one? Grace?
I just was able to log into the application, so I have the numbers if you wanted any specifics. So you're right, direct financial assistance was the 390,000, and where the construction costs would be probably the other bucket, and that's 268,380.
268,380?
838.
830.
And then the other ones was personnel, rent, utilities, and supplies. And I'd say my 2 cents, I think that I can see the logic behind that decision, and just hope that they can also carry it out, because it is hard to have kind of unfunded programs without, as far as not having the staff assistance to run the program.
Okay, so is there consensus, thumbs up for the direct rental assistance and facilities improvement? One
Yeah,
thumb down?
my thumbs up, but I would say, to Mary Alice's point, there will be a couple that I think we might be in alignment there with the additional rental assistance.
Well, this sounds like something that might
tie
get,
that back.
might get tweaked as we go along. Okay, but we have thumbs, 7 thumbs up and 1 thumb down. So the thumbs are winning on this one. Or up thumbs are winning. It's a thumb war. 268, well, money for facilities and rental. And we'll add that up and see what that amounts to. Rental and, which is pretty close to what the median funding allocation is actually. All right, the next number 8 on the list, and the last one actually, is Housing Authority of Champaign County Youth Build. The Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I missed that one. Neighborhood Connections. Requested funding amount, $100,000. Minimum funding allocated was 70, maximum was 100, median is 100.
Yep.
Update their fire system and then repair their buses they have for youth transport. So if the median's 100 and they're requesting 100, I think that's fine.
Mary Alice?
I agree with Chandra. I was willing to spend, willing to fund the sprinkler system and transportation. I think during her presentation, she mentioned whatever was left over, she would, buy some supplies for families. So I'm fine with the 100,000. I would just like it to be clear that it's for the vehicles and for the sprinkler system.
Okay. Any other comments? Jan?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, again, these are clear one-time costs with a long-term benefit for an agency that's been doing a lot of good in Urbana for a long time. And I think this is, for specifying those costs is totally reasonable, though.
Okay, thumbs up for 100. James?
My thumb is up.
Okay. Now, moving on to the last 8, which is the youth build from the Housing Authority. The amount requested was $400,000. The minimum funding allocated was $200, maximum $400. Looks like the median is $350. Comments? Mary Alice?
This one was hard for me. The reason it was hard for me is one of my things that I was thinking about as I was doing the funding allocations is the impact. How many people are we impacting? And if I remember correctly, I think that they said 25 kids for each year. That said, I do recognize the fact that if you're dealing with construction, that's an expensive project, and it's something that is really needed in our community to give training to people so that they can have some construction skills. They're good paying jobs. It's a great skill to have. So I think I was a little low on this one, but I would be fine with the median on this one. This one was a hard one for me.
Any other comments? Chandra?
I think what I excluded from this was the rental space, because I thought that they were trying to find a location outside of Urbana. I'm trying to remember. But it was funding for everything else but the rental space, if I remember my rationale correctly.
I believe it was for in Urbana, because they're based in Champaign now, and they wanted a location in Urbana for short term, though. It was 18
Yeah,
months.
and I think that was the thing that got me, that it was only for 18 months.
Grace?
Thanks. I think, as I recall from their presentation, that this was also kind of a demonstration, and then they'll be able to secure longer-term funding from, I don't know if it was grants or federal funding. So I think I recall this one being a kind of demonstration pilot program for that time period, and then have plans for it to have continued funding after it demonstrates success here. So I think this is a good use of ARPA funding for us. I hope that this increment of $350 instead of $400 is something that's workable for them. As you said, either if they can reduce rent costs, or it looks like in their budget, $50,000 was from supplies necessary to deliver the services. So it looks like if we were to cut $50,000, that would be an increment, and I'd hope that they could rearrange things or raise other funds and still be able to run this program without the full funding.
Sharice?
I thought that this was a program that they did, and they wanted to be able, because there's a wait list, and they wanted to expand it. That this is actually something that they already do, but they can only have so many kids in the program based on
Yeah,
the.
yeah,
the
it's an
lowest
ongoing program now. This would just allow them to add more students, focus on Urbana students, and it covers tuition, materials, and the
And,
expenses of the
instruction.
program. Yeah. Well, not the cost of
No,
construction.
not construction, instruction.
Right. This is workforce training, basically. Okay, we have 350 as a medium. Thumbs up, thumbs down. James?
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
Up.
Okay. All right, that takes care of the number 8s. We'll move on to the number 7s and see how many we get through. Going back up to the Urbana Free Library, which is the youth programming specialist. The requested funding was for $370,733. Minimum funding was 0. Maximum $377,733. The median came out to be $186,500, and this was, if I recall, was a multi-year support. I believe it was 3 years? 3 to 4 years, 3 years. So our median that was recommended was $186,500. Comments? Chandra?
Well, I know my rationale for this one was fund it for, I think, 1 year or 2 years, and then have the library or incorporate it into its regular budget for the position. But I don't recall exactly what the per year salary was, so if we want to, so 23 was 85,512, 24 was 88,084. So,
This is basically 2 years' worth.
yeah,
Okay. And I think the request was 3 years.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So 173 would fund the first 2 years, I think.
Okay. Mary Alice?
So I had a similar thing, and as Jaya was talking about kind of what the pattern is I was, for agencies that have funds and budgets, regular budgets and so forth, I wanted them to work in the positions into their regular budgets. And Celeste, bless her, she said that they have money for 20 hours in the budget currently, in the presentation. And so that's why I said, okay, well, I'll fund that at 50% for year 1 and year 2, which actually equates to 1 FTE for those 2 years that we would be covering. So that was my rationale for the amount that I gave. So I guess I don't know how much like one FTE for 1 year would cost. Did you say 173?
173,
Is 1 year?
2.
2 years?
That'd be the first 2 years. It's 173, just shy of 600.
So, yeah, I mean, I would say that I would fund a 50% position for year 1 and year 2. That's my argument.
Then you think half of that would be your recommendation? I agree with some of those thoughts, either 2 years full funding or even half if they have already the budget for half-time position, and then incorporating it into their regular budget. I do think that the 186,500 again seems a little arbitrary, so I think it might make sense to make it a unit number as far as years or time.
Said 2 years was 173?
173,596.
That's 600.
So you, sorry.
Sharice.
So you took that 370, 733 and just divided it by 3?
No, I'm looking at the application budget when they break it down by year.
Okay. And it,
But I
Okay.
guess the question is it half a position or a full position for 2 years? That's the question.
Or full-time 2 years, or part-time for the 4 years, since they are asking for 4 years. So I'd be okay with that amount, and then however they can split it, I guess.
The 173,600? Thumbs up on that?
Yeah, I support that.
Suggestion was for 2 years for half a position, so it would be half of that amount. So roughly 80,000, roughly speaking. So it's either 80,000 or 173, 85,000 or 170, somewhere around there.
You have a total figure you're proposing?
Well, my proposal was half a position for 2 years.
Total.
Yeah, I was supporting Grace's suggestion, which is a full position for 2 years or half a position for 4 years.
Which totals the 173,600.
All right, that's fine.
Right.
Let them figure out how to divide, how to allocate it.
And it might not go perfectly, as Chandra mentioned, if that's what maybe you're saying, is that the increases cost, they probably account for inflation and raises each year. But I think the ultimate goal is, like Jay is keeping us nice and aware of, having the longevity of this position and that it needs to be added into their annual budget. I think they mentioned not wanting to raise tax rates and levies, and that all makes sense. But, I mean, we are increasing, and their percentage of the taxes that are increasing can also increase. So I think however they want to split it, I'm in favor of 173,600.
173,600 is in the blank. Thumbs up? James?
Yes.
Great. Okay. The next number 7 on the list is Eastern Illinois Food Bank, which covers electric cargo vans and charging stations. The request was for $133,000. Minimum funding was 0. Maximum funding was 133. The median is 86,141.
How does that line up against one vehicle and the charging station? What would that cost be?
And I think it's, as I recall, it was 133 for 2 vehicles and installation. So my guess would be cut that in half, would be 66,500.
Well, they're going to need the charging station no matter what. So I don't know how that broke out. So I'm comfortable with the idea of only buying one vehicle, but I think there's a cost for the.
If I remember correctly, I
Charging
think the
station,
charging station was about 5,000.
Wouldn't that be included in
Okay.
here? I think that would be included in their request.
So the question is, do you
It
want?
sounds like if it's 5,000, then it would be half of 128 plus 5,000.
Well, another way to look at this, do you want to fund one vehicle
So
or two
69,000.
vehicles?
One.
That's it?
Yep.
I just don't think 86,000 is the right number.
Right, okay. So let's go with.
If we're going with one vehicle, it seems like it's 69,000 if the charging station is $5,000.
So am I saying thumbs up for one vehicle, one charging station? Okay. All righty. Next, number 7 on the list is Champaign County Healthcare Consumers, Special Populations Outreach and Enrollment for Health, Food, and Housing Security. The requested funding was $818,716. The minimum allocation, 0, up to maximum $818,716. The median funding allocation comes in at $510,933. Comments? Grace?
I think this might be another one where it'd be good to think about a more meaningful increment. Trying to recall and pull up their thing, but I think this was for a number of positions. And I also had, my question and comment too was, I think, was this one of the ones that overlapped with HHI funding they just got? But there was ones that were the same. It was like 2 positions for 2 years versus 3 positions for 4 years. So anyway, that was my comment question was, is it appropriate, necessary, the right thing to do to subtract funding that they already got for HHI if it's for the same positions and program?
It was for different types of positions.
HHI was for special populations. ARPA is for senior citizens and disabled people and mentally challenged people. I don't know what the definition of exactly of what special populations for the HHI funding, but it's 2 separate things.
I'd like more information on that because their project name is Special Populations Outreach and Enrollment.
That's what it says.
So I think that would be helpful to have some more clarification from the applicant and maybe other departments that are involved in HHI stuff to clarify.
Yeah, there was an email.
So what we sent to date is RPC and different teams doing the different ones. They preliminarily looked at it. This one was identified as a source of potential overlap between the funds, and then there was one of the follow-up questions where they did respond, saying how while it looks like the same. The applicant was saying that the special populations are different special populations, and that was the applicant's response to that question at that time.
Find the email.
Right here. Well, okay. Under the description of what that I see of this, it basically the problem: not enough resources exist in Urbana to meet the needs of low-income seniors, low-income or no-income people with disabilities, and immigrants. So I think that defines the special populations. And
I have the email here,
Okay.
or the response. Here are the distinctions. ARPA special populations, low-income seniors in Urbana, low-income immigrants in Urbana, and no or low-income people with disabilities in Urbana who need help with disability applications. HHI special populations are homeless, near homeless, and recently homeless individuals in Champaign County.
So 2 different populations. Okay. So HHI has been passed and approved and voted on. Mary Alice, we're looking at this application.
So for this application, the one thing that I think is really complex is SSI, so the disability. So I was willing to fund that position for 2 years. That was my proposal.
Well, the number median we're looking at is 510,933. Does anyone have a different number they want to propose? Grace?
Thank you. Again, just with the increments, so with their application, they have the yearly costs. So the first 2 years combined would be 392 some thousand. And then when you add the third year, it takes it up to 600 some. So it seems like our 510 is kind of a strange number in between funding for 2 or 3 years. So maybe even make it increments, like if we want to do 2.5 in between, but I think a more meaningful increment might make sense instead of.
I think it's good to split years in terms of hiring people. So.
Correct, but I think this was also multiple positions, so it could be one position lasts that third year and the others don't. However, they need to split it possibly.
So is the proposal to fund partially and they can choose which positions to hire, or is the proposal, is it the type of hire that we want in the position? My argument was the type of hire, but it sounds like your argument is they can choose which one they need, and we just give a percentage funding for over a time period. Is that right?
I guess what I'm seeing is kind of two options. Like we could just go with, say, 510,000 because that was our median and that's just what we came up with, or have kind of a reason for that specific amount, saying either we're funding a certain number of years or a certain number of positions. I think either way, to me, it makes sense to have kind of a more logical rationale for the amount that we're awarding.
Well, it has to, when the contract's written, it has to specify exactly what we're funding. So we will eventually have to, we're not going to say, here's $500,000, go spend it. We have to say, this funds X, Y, and Z.
So you're saying we can even stick with that and they can come back before the contracts on how they want to split it? Is that what you're saying?
No, the contract, when they sign, when we give them the contract, if the contract passes here and they agree to it, then that is where the funding is used. Now, if something happens, we can amend the contract, but we still have to specify what we want those funds to be spent with. Correct me if I'm wrong, Carol.
No, you're right. But what Grace is saying is, based on their application, you could specify now, when you select the amount, what exactly do you want to fund? So just to kind of bridge the gap between what the two of you are saying. So, I mean, what Grace is saying, I think makes sense. The 510 is just a mathematical calculation. What exactly is it that you want to fund? And then that number should go in, right?
What exactly how many positions did they ask for?
For 2 years? 4.
For 4 years.
Wrote 2 for.
Wrote 2 for.
2 for.
Okay, so with some number stuff, I may offer a suggestion. So closest to that I think is making sense to me would be just shy of 5,000, 497,359 would be the amount to fund both positions for the first 2 years and then half of the third year, meaning like was it 3 positions? Oh, maybe it doesn't work as well then. But you know what I mean? They could hire some positions that are for 2 years, some that are for 3 years, and / also hopefully finding reoccurring funding or other grants, other options to fund those positions.
So what is your number again?
Is it 2 or 3 staff positions? Because that might make a difference, I guess. It is 3. Okay, so might not make as much sense, but the first, essentially 2.5 years, and not talking half years, but half positions for the third year would be just under 500,000, 497,359. But if it's 3 positions, that doesn't make as much sense.
Okay, so 3 positions for 4 years, is what we're talking about?
That's what they're asking for.
Yeah, that would be the full amount of their request.
What about 3 positions for 2 years? That's half.
that was just under 400,000. That was like 392, 340. That's why I'm trying to get kind of closer to our medium, because either 2 years is a decent amount under and 3 years is a bit over.
So we could do 2 years for one position and 3 years for a second position, based on those numbers.
So now I'm going to take the third year. I'm taking 2025, the third year, dividing by 3 instead of 2 before. So that would be funding one of the 3 positions for third year. And the other positions for the first 2 years would be 462,353.
Okay, so how many positions are we proposing to fund? 1, 2, or 3?
So I think it would be 3.
Okay, so 3 positions, and then how many years?
So that calculation was for 3 positions fully funded for the first 2 years.
Okay.
And
got it.
then the third year, having just one of those positions funded for a third year.
Okay, all right.
So 3 FTEs for 2 years, 1 FTE for 3 years, or for?
So, yeah,
That's
2
what I'm
years
getting
for
confused.
2 FTE for 2 years, 1 FTE for 3 years.
Okay. 2 FTEs for 2 years, 1 FTE for 3 years comes out to 462,353.
Yeah, if we're not dealing with the pennies and change, I'm not going on the other side of the decimal, yeah.
Chris?
Well, the need is great. I voted for full funding, and I'll take what I can get, but I'm just wondering, how realistic is it for someone to take a job for just 2 years?
I can't speak for anyone. I've never had job security longer than a year at a time, but I mean, I can't speak for others, but I would say it's not uncommon to have a yearly contract that gets renewed, but I don't know.
Yeah, all the adjuncts are 9 months.
Okay.
I thought in this presentation there was an implication that they would be looking for future funding from other sources. So this is a way to step into that.
Okay, we have on the floor 2 FTEs for 2 years, 1 FTE for 3 years, coming out to 462,353. Thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay.
462, what again?
462,353. Okay. Champaign County Economic Development Corporation, this is the Small Business Microloan Fund for with Justine Peterson. The request was for 475. Minimum funding allocated was 0, maximum 400, the median 261,068.
Does anybody have the steps that they provided steps
Yes, they did.
on this? What's the closest step to 261? I would suggest we take that. Did they have one for 250?
They want
Yes.
for 175 and 250, yeah. I'd go for 250.
I think I put 250 too. We're looking for the steps, James.
$250 is for 100 to 115 businesses served.
Yeah, I say we pick that as the option they gave us that's close to our median.
Okay. 250, thumbs up.
I have a question.
You have all 5 digits up. Okay, yes.
Sorry.
Not allowed.
So I guess I want to say this for everything that we're talking about tonight, is that these are Urbana dollars. So I want it to be for Urbana businesses. So I just want to make that clear.
Is that a condition?
It is a condition that all of this is for Urbana people.
Okay.
There you go.
But that can be written into the contract. Thank you, good point.
How much did you say?
And I think Carly said that was the idea. So I don't think they're going to push
250.
back at it on that at all.
All right, the next number 7 is New American Welcome Center, COVID-19 recovery for immigrant communities. The request was $622,000. Funding allocations went from 0 to 622. Median funding allotment was $313,600. Mary Alice.
So this is one of the ones that I gave an amount, but I wanted it to be used for rental, and I wanted to see if township would actually administer it.
Yeah.
So I can foresee a need for a staff member, like maybe a part-time staff member that would need to help facilitate those conversations to make sure that they can translate and communicate to people who are coming into the center, you know, how this process works and so forth. But I was thinking that the actual fund disbursement would come from township. So
The township would administer their
because they already have a program, right? But that was just my idea. Because otherwise, they're going to have to come up with their whole strategy on how they do that.
I believe they have one. They have one in place.
They do have one in place? Oh, the refugee center doesn't have one in place. It's the new Welcome Center that does.
Welcome Center has one in place. Yeah. And it was for rent and utility assistance, I believe. Chandra?
In their thing, they said 72.3% of the funds will go to support direct financial assistance, and their entire ask was $622,000, and so 72% of that is basically $450,000. So if we want to fund just the direct assistance and not, say, the personnel or administrative costs, that would be the number, which is higher than our median.
I guess what my argument would be is I'm looking at what we're giving township, which is for all of Urbana residents. They also have their own funds as well. So I do think it would be okay if we gave them, if we said, all right, this can be used for, you know, eviction prevention and utilities, but this is the dollar amount because they just have X number of dollars. Even though the median is lower than the amount that they requested for that specific task, it's easier to administer a lower amount. You're not like firing somebody or hiring somebody. So I would go with the median. No, thank you. I appreciate that.
So is there a number? The median is 313,600. The 72% of the 622 turned out to be 450,000.
Yeah, that's the breakdown in their application too, was direct assistance for 450,000, personnel for 120,000, and administrative costs for 52. And I do support and see the logic of the direct assistance being the main thing, but I think that's also things we need to think about. You know, when the city departments give out a grant and manage it, we don't expect it to not have any administrative costs. I think especially if it's an organization that might have to hire someone to be able to do this or an additional person, just some things to consider. But I imagine that hopefully we'll have some back and forth with the applicants in designing the contract and any details that need to be made. So I definitely support, you know, the most as we can to direct assistance. And I also understand that there may be some necessary administrative costs, and I don't want to leave them with a program that they can't actually manage to have the labor for it.
So is there a number that you can agree on? 450? 313?
I'll do, yeah, we can just round it to 320 if we want to make it a round number. Given that we need to find out how much money they'd need to administer the actual grant, like paperwork, basically is what I'm hearing you say, Grace.
Jaya?
So I would be in support of 450 on this one. They say that they've distributed nearly $1 million in direct assistance to immigrant families already. and have a process for screening and eligibility. And I hear that piece around staffing, and certainly if they can't administer those funds without additional staffing, I think that's something that would have to be a conversation. But I felt like in their presentation, they made a pretty strong case for why this is COVID-specific, which is the purpose of these funds. And so I feel like something higher than our median feels appropriate to me, especially because these are organizations that are providing culturally specific services in spaces that already tend to feel safe for folks who might not be as comfortable coming to other offices for support. So even though it's above the median, I would personally be supportive of no less than 450,000.
Sandra?
And I think, like you said, if they're unable to distribute the funds with the staff they have, I think that they can read that contract and say 450 for just direct assistance. And then if they say, oh, we actually need this person, then we can amend that contract and say, okay, 400,000 for direct assistance and 50,000 for that staff person. So that's just if they say they can't administer it without it. So, but yeah, I say 450 for direct service.
Mary Alice?
So the only problem with upping that means that we'll have to decrease somebody else's by, it's over $100,000 that we're giving them above the median, which might be difficult. I'm just pointing that out.
I agree, but I think we've also reduced some to another increment, so I would hope that by the end, or if our increments go up and down, it balances out okay.
It's called wishful budgeting.
We can put
We
an
can
asterisk.
tentatively, this is tentative. This
Yeah,
is first round.
round.
Okay, thumbs up, 450. There's a thumbs down. James?
I'm a
Thumb?
thumbs up with a caveat that this is one of the first places we need to come back to if
Okay.
we're over.
Revisit if necessary. Okay. That's a half-hearted thumbs up? Okay. Okay. It's at 450 now, and it's tentative. And again, it may be tweaked before we're done. Next up is City of Urbana Student Family Community Engagement Sponsorship. This was for 3 years for $220,977. The allocation ranged from 0 to $220,977. Median is 150, which would essentially cover 2 years, approximately. Any comments on that? Mary Alice?
I mean, just like we've said with other things, I think this is something that they should work into their budget moving forward. So I'm fine with funding a position for the first year or two, but then beyond that, I would hope that they would be able to look over their budget and see how they can work that in. I guess my question is, Grace has got everything open and I'm locked out of Neighborly at the moment. How much is the position each year, Grace?
$73,659.
Okay, so it's basically equivalent to 2 years of the median is rough.
So 2 years is 147,318.
Is that with benefits and
2
everything
years.
included?
That's 2 years. You want 2 years? So are you agreed on 2 years? Okay. And we think it's 147 approximately. So 150.
Up to 150.
The request was for 220,977.
My question was, is this with benefits and everything, or? Yeah. One full-time for 2 years?
Yeah, what's that? Would- 143? 143, 334. 2 years.
And I had another question, sorry if I missed it while I was looking for this piece of information, was that they have some expenses in 2022. And I guess I didn't understand if that was a reimbursement stuff or just because our applications closed November. I'm just trying to figure out what that was. So that was some of my thought, was fund the program minus those 2022 costs. Half the year. I don't know.
They have 41,806, which is relatively half of the 71,667 written down in 2022. And so I'm wondering if that's supposed to be in the 2023 year for the fall half of this year. Does that make sense? Or does it?
Oh, Carol. I guess if the direction you gave was you want to fund 2 years, and it can be allocated however they want. Would that work?
So 2 full years for
Two full years.
143, 334?
Okay, and we think it's 143, 334. But we'll need to verify that.
Whatever 2 years equals.
Whatever 2 years equals. We'll try to find that out before we finalize. Okay, so we've got 143,334, which we intend to fund for 2 years period. Okay, thumbs up. James?
Yes.
So that's 7 up and 1 down. Okay. Next item is Red Herring, let's see. Yes, Red Herring Restaurant, Healthy Meals for Families Facing Food Insecurity. They requested $24,985. Minimum funding allocated goes from 0 to 25,000. The median funding allotment is 24,985. Comments?
What they requested.
Okay. Comment. Jaya.
Yeah, so this is going to be my same comment of concerns about sustainability of staffing. So labor costs, 15,360. You know, we've got a lot of really good relationships with Red Herring, with the Bucket Brigade, but in terms of covering the cost of staffing, my understanding from the presentation was they were asking for us to pay for an existing staffing cost, which again, that goes back to that question that sounds like supplanting to me, which I'm not comfortable with. When you're using funds to fund something that is already funded, that's often not allowable. Maybe that's a point of clarification we need. But for me, again, if there isn't a plan for long-term funding for something that is an ongoing need, that is concerning. The meals make sense because there's likely to be more of that ongoing impact of COVID. But I do have concerns that, 61% of the meal cost is labor.
So can we, give a flat dollar amount? Likely more than 8,100 and say this is for food only?
You can propose it. What was your dollar amount?
So I just pulled it up, and when they gave the presentation, I thought that they gave us the amount each meal would cost, and then they just multiplied it out.
$10 a meal.
$10 a meal, but when I look at their actual project budget, there's no food in here. It just says personnel, supplies, travel, and administration. And supplies needed to deliver the services performed, which is $8,100. So I don't know if that's the food? Okay, well, maybe they just named it something else in their application. So it sounds to me like we would potentially fund the supplies and travel and not the personnel? Is that the proposal?
That's kind of what I'm getting from looking, because it says 61% labor, 15,360 purchasing, preparing, and distributing. And then they have 32% cost of goods, $8,100, focusing on local wholesalers like Sola Gracia Farm. So, I don't know, is there a crossover of those particular things?
Seems like the question in my mind is, are we going to fund the personnel, which is 15,000, or are we not going to fund the personnel? That's the question.
Grace, you gonna comment?
I was going to chime in with the numbers there. Subtracting the personnel will be $9,625. And I'm okay with that. I am curious on a little more information about if that is their existing things, because there also that includes administrative costs and supplies and travel.
$9,600 was food or supplies, which we assume is food.
Yep, so the $9,625 is for everything except personnel, which includes supplies, travel, and administrative costs. And if we ever do this again, which I guess for process sake, I hope not, as far as getting, federal funding into the community, I guess I hope so. But I think it would be really helpful to see more of an itemized budget, because I feel like some of these expenses just didn't fit neatly into the pre-selected categories. So I think if we do ever do this again, it would be helpful to have attached like itemized budgets for each proposal.
So I'm going to make a case for the personnel, and here's my rationale. We are already funding other, the school district, they can work it into their budget. We're saying 2 years for them, or for healthcare consumers, we're saying 2 years or 3 years for them. So I'm okay actually funding a salaried person this isn't even a full-time salary person, this is a part-time person. You can't pay $15,000 for a full-timer. So that's just my thought in terms of why I'd be okay paying for this personnel.
Yeah.
So if we're going to adjust the dollar amount, the way I would encourage we think about it is, this is a small scale, try something, see if they can build on it model. I think we should think in terms of how many meals do we want to deliver like this, because it doesn't make sense to me to say, oh, here's the money for the food, for the meals you want to make, and figure the rest of it out. If you're wanting to make this program work, you decide how many meals you want them to deliver, and you fund that.
So I hear that, right, and that there certainly could be additional staffing needs if we're asking them to produce more food. But when I asked about the staffing in their presentation, they said it was to support their existing staff. That's what makes me uncomfortable, right, this is not creating a half-time position or a part-time position. From what they said in their presentation, this is funding their existing staff, which, like I said, I'm not an ARPA expert, I don't know. Maybe depending on how it's funded, maybe that is allowable. But again, if we're saying, yes, we want to work with you, we want to support you, but this is something they already have, to me, it doesn't make sense for us to fund it. So I definitely am on board with, making sure we're supporting healthy food options. Food is a major concern in our community, but if they already have the staff to produce it, I don't think it makes sense for us to be funding something that they already should have in their budget.
Chandra?
But also, like, the ARPA funds is to help, maybe they had to, I don't know, lay off some staff people, and they're wanting to bring them back, and that's what they mean by existing staff? I mean, it's just...
It was that person.
Okay. Well, I propose just $10,000 for cost of goods.
Thumbs up on that?
I'm still curious and more information. I would like more from them about that situation if possible.
Yeah, that's what I would like more because I guess the thing I'm thinking, my understanding from Red Herring is that a lot of the people that work there are volunteers as well. And with the way that food has gone up and people are, maybe somebody that is already volunteering would kind of like to get paid. Because like Mary Alice said, $15,000, that's not enough. No one can live on that, but it may cover the cost of gas, because it says purchasing, preparing, and distributing.
know. Yeah.
We just don't know, so I'd like to get more information.
If I'm remembering correctly from when they did their presentation, one of the people who presented said it would go towards her compensation, who was already an existing staff member. If I'm incorrect on that, then I think it's worth revisiting, and I hear that argument, right? But that was not what I took away from that presentation. What I heard when I asked about their plan for labor costs was that it was to fund one of the people sitting in front of us who was already employed at Red Herring.
Then I'd like to hear, just know for sure.
Yeah, for
Okay,
sure.
so we could put 10,000 in as a placeholder, that's your minimum.
Because that might be just
and,
gas money.
Seek more information as far as the staffing.
Yeah, definitely, because might also, maybe it's moving someone from part-time to full-time or paying overtime.
We'll find out.
So, yeah.
Rather than speculating. Okay, 10,000 is the placeholder. Common Ground, they requested 45,000. The allocations went from 0 to 45,000. The median turned out to be 45,000. Mary Alice.
All right, so my thought on this was they already have money set aside for this program. I think I gave them $10,000 because I wanted to only go to Urbana people. And when I asked them about that, they said they did have a way to figure out if it was an Urbana person or not. And then I thought, well, you know, this could be something easy for us. If it ends up that there's an issue and somebody can't spend all their money, we can easily just say, okay, we can give you X number of dollars more. I would be fine to say 45,000, even though I didn't suggest it, as long as the stipulation in there is they use their existing budget before they use the ARPA money, and it goes to Urbana residents.
Any thoughts?
I think what they were saying was that they have money in their budget for this, but they're having more and more participants each year, and so they were estimating the cost over the next several years to increase to use the $45,000 over the next several years as a anticipated increase.
Right, and I agree, that's what they were saying. I guess they didn't qualify which portion was Urbana shoppers versus non-Urbana shoppers. And they had a pretty steep increase, so as I said, I'm fine with the 45 with those two stipulations.
Yeah, I definitely agree to whatever funding we give. The participant will have to be an Urbana resident and be able to, I don't know what, prove that somehow with an ID. I don't, yeah.
So I'm following your logic, Mary Alice, but I might want to, I definitely want to sign on for the stipulation for Urbana support people, but I'm maybe we flip it. Instead of saying 45, we say 20. But as we get towards the end, this would seem to be a place where we could divert funds that hadn't been able to be spent otherwise to easily invest in more, as opposed to starting out with it at the max ask.
J.O.
So I'm going to be the stick in the mud again. Just I have concerns about this is a long-term problem that they're trying to fix with short-term money. So I don't have any problem with suggesting let's give them a year of additional support to try to figure out if they can make this sustainable. But there are a lot of different organizations that are addressing food insecurity in our community, and I think that I have questions about whether this is the most cost-effective way of addressing that concern. Not that having access to fresh local produce isn't something we should be supporting. But again, I didn't hear a plan for how they're going to actually sustain this program. And I don't think whether it's a year or a few years that we're supporting it is going to change that fact. So I don't have a problem with doing a lower amount, but I would suggest a lower amount rather than the full 45,000, just because of that lack of sustainability.
Does anyone have a number?
I think James suggested 20.
Is that a year?
First
Yeah.
year is 10,000, second year is 15,000, so I'd say maybe 10 or 25.
Well, to be consistent with Red Herring, that you had 10. 10 is a placeholder, and this is one of those flexible. And the stipulations are Urbana residents and use existing budget before the ARPA money. You can revisit.
Yeah, I think that's one I'd like more information on. I don't know that they have a way to enforce who's Urbana residents or not, so some of the details to work out.
I thought that I asked that question, and I thought she said when they sign up, they have to give their address, but I could be wrong.
Okay, thumbs up on 10. Oh, you have a question, Sharice?
And what Mary Alice is saying, they have to give their address, and if they don't, now they do. That's all I'm saying. So, if you don't normally give your address, well, now you do give your address, because they're being funded from another source. You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
Okay.
Thumbs up? James?
Yes.
Okay. Next is the Housing Authority Steer Place renovation project. The request was for $1.5 million. The allocations went from 0 to 1 million. The median allocation is 375,000. This was for renovating Steer Place, various facility improvements.
I'm not familiar with that. Could somebody give me some more information about Steer Place?
Steer Place is a facility in southeast Urbana. It's run by the Housing Authority. It is for seniors, and they define seniors as 55 and plus now. It's not assisted living, but it's apartments for seniors and low-income seniors housing.
Is that
And
off of,
It's off of, is it Cottage Grove, James? Colorado.
Colorado?
We were there on Christmas Day, yes.
Okay.
So it's an older building.
Yeah,
and
it's at the intersection of Cottage Grove and Colorado.
Colorado, yeah, and it's an older building, and it's in need of about $6 million, I believe, in repairs. Chandra?
Yeah, so I remember this one, and they said that if they were awarded less, they would just apply for different loans and tax credits for the remainder. And yes, you're right, it was a total cost of $6 million. I think because it's the Housing Authority and they have access to other funds, I suggested just funding the removal of the asbestos, because I think, that's clearly the largest problem, I think. And then they can get, I don't know how much the asbestos would cost, but that was my suggestion, because they have access to other funds.
Yeah, that's a significant problem, but the other problem is their heating system is having issues. It failed on Christmas Eve, and that's why Diane and I were there on Christmas Day. And even though they repaired the boiler, there are rooms, because it is a hot water heating system. There are rooms that the water doesn't flow to. The radiators are not doing their job. So it's a situation where we have residents they only moved to 55 and older several years ago. A lot of the residents are 65 and older, and they don't have a heating system that is working to the degree it needs to.
Yeah, it's one of the older housing complexes for seniors. I'm just looking at the...
Yeah, if that boiler had not been repaired, we would have had a critical rehousing issue. And in the size of that, the population of that building, it's 6 stories tall.
They did qualify for tax credits, though, Sheila announced.
So would it be possible to get an estimate for what's in their project budget for the asbestos removal, and if there's something in there for heating, so that we have a basis to understand what amount if we give them?
That's all you want to fund then?
I know that they talked about elevators, but I can't remember what else they talked about.
I think this is a hard one too, because the budget is just all construction costs. So I think this would definitely be one that would be helpful to have a breakdown of their expected costs. I definitely support, whatever we can for supporting Steer Place. I think it's a really important housing resource. And I also, with the acknowledgement that there are other funding sources available for them. I don't recall if this was one of the ones in future conversations about also HHI funding. So I can understand why not funding the full amount. I don't have another number to offer, but I don't have a problem with the median. For me, this was, when I was doing it by myself, this was the category that I just put whatever remainder we could to get to 10 million. I don't have a very specific number, but, as much as we can spare.
It's a very costly renovation. It's an old building, and it needs a lot of work. And it serves a great need in our community. But
So should we put a placeholder for the median and then follow up with some additional information in terms of that breakdown for the budget?
yeah, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
The median's at 375.
Yeah.
Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up as a starting point.
I'll support that. I think we may find that if we get information on the heating system, that
So your
this one
interest
might
is in,
be something we'd look at more.
your interest is specifically in HVAC, asbestos, and there was a third, was there a third component?
I just said I know that they were talking about also doing elevator stuff, so.
Okay,
Well,
But I don't remember what other components were part of
all
the
right, so you need a
rehabilitation.
budget. Okay.
They also talk about doing a new roof.
It needs everything.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think my point is that maybe there should be a cap of sorts. And let's see how much we can get, how much can get done for this amount coming from the city, and that's what I'm thinking, a kind of a cap. You see what I'm saying? Right. What can be done with $375,000?
I'm looking at the next one. Well, I don't know which one's the next one we're going to be talking about, but there are some other things that when we talk about it, if we have leftover, this is a place I'd like to come back to.
Okay, well, we'll try to get a better breakdown of the construction, major parts of the budget, and this, you're using 375 as a placeholder right now. Thumbs up? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, next up is Champaign County Environmental Stewards, which is the household hazardous waste. Is that wrong?
Sorry, just looking at the time.
It's 10:30. Can we do one more?
8 minutes.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. We'll stop at 10:30. Household hazardous waste collection facility, the request was for 300,000. The allocations ranged from 0 to 300,000, and the median is 175. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Grace?
I just want to redisclose, if I haven't already yet in public in this context, that I have a conflict with being a board member of this group, and I think we talked about still participating, but disclosing that, so this is me disclosing that, and I don't have any problem with the median amount.
Any other comments? I see a thumb up already, okay.
Yeah, my thumbs up. This is something we really need in this community. So we gotta support it.
I see a hand up.
I guess I just want to say something about the where I know the location of this, where they were talking about, which would be north of 74. I'm imagining in the industrial area, and I do worry about the environmental, because there's so much industry over in that environmental, and I do worry about what the environmental issues might be, so close to my neighborhood.
They hadn't identified a location, had they? Grace?
Correct. I'd say there's not a location solidified yet. And also just to keep in mind that this isn't adding new waste necessarily. This is taking all of the hazardous waste that people already have in their garages or attics or basements, wherever they have it, and just getting it collected in one spot and out of the community, actually. So there might be, some if surrounding counties come, but I think overall, the stuff's not going to be disposed there. It's not going to be buried or burned or anything on that site. It's just collected, stored temporarily, and then moved somewhere else for proper disposal.
Okay.
Jaya? Oh, sorry, Chris?
So Grace, what do they do with the waste? Where does it get buried? Where does it get taken? What's going on?
Susan answered that question better than I can, but there's different places that specialize in either incinerating it, diluting it, chemically neutralizing it. It depends on what it is.
Okay.
Jaya?
Thanks. So I'm fine with the median amount. I think I just would want clarification on what that accomplishes for them, right? Like how helpful that is. I know it's part of a larger capital campaign, but I think as long as it's a impactful contribution, I would be in favor of it, because I do think, I would agree with what James said, that this is something that we need.
Okay, we have a median on the floor for 175. Thumbs up? Okay. If we can do one more before 10:30, that will take care of all the number sevens. Want to try it? Okay.
Do it.
Well Experience, Well Family Care Program, the request was 250. The allocations ranged from 0 to 250. The median is 165. Comments?
I can support that as a placeholder.
I would like to see if Grace could bring up the budget to see if there were specific things.
We're trying to bring up a budget here.
So I've got 90,000 in personnel, 20,000 in rent and utilities, 7,000 in supplies, 68 in direct financial assistance, 25 in administrative, 25 in construction, and 15 in legal. I think they were going to renovate some space.
It says improve the infrastructure to allow to serve clients, community through enhancing youth, creating more office space with building for group and private meetings, enhancing the youth and teen spaces for quality evening, weekend, and summer programming. Instruction.
So I think where I thought that, I'm trying to be consistent here in terms of how we treat different groups of people. So giving rent and personnel to kind of start up. I mean, she talked about expanding her program for 1 or 2 years would be okay with me. I don't remember where the direct financial assistance was going, but I don't think that I suggested funding that. Does anybody have a recollection of where that was going? Yeah, the direct financial assistance. I don't remember the details on that.
Assistance with food, diapers, and other support as it relates to increasing the health of mother and child. Provide economic and financial assistance to families to help prevent homelessness and loss of utilities, provide transportation assistance, assist with food insecurities, and provide case management. Okay, yeah, so it's just,
So I think the resources that we have in the community, I think that they could be directed to different areas. So I would be okay funding them if it comes out to the median dollar amount is fine with me. But the other, I guess I would take out the direct financial assistance. And then it would be variable in terms of how long we do the personnel, rent, utilities, if we're going to do them, what the timeline is for that.
The one thing I'd like to clarify is I think the transportation component should be in there, because one of the challenges they have is getting participants from school after school to their location. And so that if that's part of the direct financial assistance, the transportation component is one of the items I think needs to be in there for if we're supporting the program expanding.
Chandra?
I propose that we maybe do it by years, because I think 23, 24 is 150, and then whatever, they put in 10,000 for 22, and so that's 160. So if we just, and then they can allocate it how they want.
So what's the total? 160?
160.
160, okay. Thumbs up? All right.
Yes.
That's it for all the sevens. We'll start up with the sixes when we meet on the 6th of February. And by the end of that evening, we should have a tentative list and some answers to the questions that were raised tonight. And with no further business before this body, this meeting is adjourned.
Good night.